Hello, friends and comrades. Welcome to another show hosted by the Midwestern Marx Institute. Excuse me. Today, we're going to be speaking about all the latest news concerning Palestine, specifically the recent agreement to do a 4 to 5 day ceasefire, which I think it's a great victory for the pro-Palestine anti-genocide movement. It's obviously not the end of the race. We've been talking about this issue as a issue of two races. You got the sprint for a ceasefire to stop the intensification of the genocide against the Palestinian people, and you have the marathon for the right of return and the establishment of a secular state. But it is an event that showcases that the pressure that we're putting on our leaders is somewhat effective. We'll also be discussing the interview that Andrew Tate did with Piers Morgan, specifically his comments concerning the genocide of the Palestinian people. We'll be looking at the Stuart Seldowitz video. Stuart Seldowitz, by the way, for those that don't know, is Obama's national security advisor, and he recently went viral for his racist comments against Arab people. We'll also look at other stories, including Jenny Ortega quitting the Scream franchise in solidarity with Melissa Barrera, who was fired for her position and standing with the Palestinian people and against genocide. We'll get started right after this. Oh man, that intro always gets me going. Right off the bat, we have a couple super chats, but before we get to those, Eddie, how you doing, brother?
Good, man. Good. I'm home with family right now, which I'm excited to be home. But I want to say shout out to all of our super chatters, donors, and Patreon supporters, because obviously all of our funding comes from the Institute. And the reason I'm able to be with you guys today, the reason I was able to hop on the stream is because of the iPad fundraiser that we did. So pretty nifty piece of technology we got here that allows me to just drop right into these streams. It's kind of amazing to me, but yeah, shout out to you all and thank you for your generous donations.
Absolutely, brother. It's great to have you on. I would have been terrified to do it alone. I love having this communicational aspect of streams. Thank you so much right off the bat to Comrade Sebastian for the $3 super sticker. As Eddie mentioned, it's a people's funded, grassroots funded institute. We don't got Soros money. There's no, unfortunately, benevolent communist billionaires sending us a fat check to promote socialism. So these donations are extremely appreciated. And thank you for another $2 super chat this time, Sebastian, who says that clip is from the halal cart I go to daily. Yeah, it's absolutely disgusting, and that's not the first time that Stuart has had similar hateful comments against people. We're gonna watch another video that Max Blumenthal recently uploaded, which is him, being basically harassing a Russian diplomat. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll examine it as a particular example of something a little bit more general, which is the role of otherization and racism in allowing the system to perpetuate itself, reproduce itself, and achieve the economic ends and the economic motives that it sets out in these projects specifically for. So, yes, hello to everyone saying hi in the chat. It's great to have you all here. I think it'd be a good story to start with the um, pause that has just been achieved, the 4 day pause. And I wanted to start by reading a statement from the Palestinian youth movement and then discussing some other things and talking about the reaction that the Biden administration has given to this 4 day pause. So the Palestinian youth movement put out a statement today on the pause, and they say that the steadfast resilience and resistance of the Palestinian people has delivered a 4 day pause in the ongoing genocide while securing the imminent release of 150 Palestinian political prisoners. It's not just the Palestinian people; it's also people from around the globe. We've seen protests and people coming into the streets, and there are millions and tens of millions from around the world like we have literally never seen before. The global movement for Palestinian liberation has played a large role in creating and sustaining the global pressure against the Zionist regime, pressure that has temporarily forced Israel's hand. That's absolutely true. You know, the narrative, the information war is definitely tipping towards the Palestinian side, and it's been for a very long time. And it's hard to think of it as moving to the other side, considering the fact that it's a genocide happening in front of our face, and most people have the phone where they can see the videos of what's going on actively. Nevertheless, a pause is just that, a pause at a time of unprecedented global outrage and awareness of the genocide against the Palestinian people. The upcoming weeks are critical. We must intensify our commitment and efforts until every single one of our demands is fulfilled. A permanent ceasefire, that's the sprint to stop the genocide, an end to the siege on Gaza, and an end to all US, Canadian, and European aid to Israel. Israel delayed this deal to continue its depraved and genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people, with the murder of over 14,000 civilians since October 7th. The scale and depth of the apartheid regime's murderous campaign demonstrates that it has every full intent of continuing its rampage once the pause ends. The call to action continues this Friday at Shut It Down for Palestine across actions across the world, and Saturday at National March on Ottawa, Canada. Join us and remain with us in the weeks and months ahead as we continue to push our demands forward. Our fight for liberation transcends any temporary pause or humanitarian concessions. We call on people of conscience everywhere to shut it down on November 24th and to continue protesting, planning, and implementing direct actions and drive campaigns focused on our primary demands. We vow to remain steadfast until every single Palestinian is free and Palestine is again ours from the river to the sea. So there we go. Eddie, what are your thoughts?
Careful, Carlos. Are the
Pause.
secret police going to come out and arrest you? Don't you know that From the River to the Sea is advocating for genocide, and you can be arrested for such things? It's
Oh my
just
God.
insane.
We've had comrades of ours, students of the Institute, like Wissam Khalid, arrested in Calgary, I believe. He's been recently exonerated. I believe the charges, I think, have been dropped. But yeah, what was he chanting? From the river to the sea, a slogan for freedom, Palestinian freedom, and equality that the Zionists have somehow twisted into something that it's not, which is the only way that they can come up with premises for their arguments. It's by twisting reality into something that it's not. From the river to the sea means that from the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea, the Palestinian people will be able to return to the land and live under a state that is not an apartheid state, under a state where they're considered full human beings and have the full rights of any other citizen. That's what it means. It's a slogan against apartheid and these last 75 years of apartheid that they've had to live under an occupation with the slogan of freedom and democracy and equality. And the fact that it's demonized by these powers that are the ones who invade the rest of the world in the names of freedom and democracy and equality shows that, you know, the way that they relate to these principles is in a very deceptive and hypocritical manner. They don't actually believe in freedom, democracy, and equality. They just say they do in order to get people to consent to the murderous and vastly unequal orders that they have propped up.
Yeah, the idea that From the River to the Sea calls for genocide is, I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. When have you ever heard a Palestinian organization say that what they want is to wipe out all Jewish people? I mean, if they did, the state of Israel would love that because it would be a fantastic propaganda piece. They could say, look at what these Palestinians are doing. They're calling to wipe out Jewish people. But as we pointed out in a previous segment, even Hamas's charter has never said that their goal is to wipe out all Jewish people. And in fact, they make a distinction in their charter. They say, well, we're not against the Jewish religion. We're against the state of Israel. We're against the apartheid system that they enforce on us, where Arabs are systematically deprived of basic civil rights. So what does from the river to the sea mean then? It means people being able to return to their land, and it means democracy. It means democracy for everybody living on that land, whether you're Jewish or Arab or whatever. But Israel is the only state in existence in the world with these rules where you only can be a part of the state of Israel if you're Jewish, right? Like if you read off the Constitution of Israel and you replace Jewish people with white people, it would be very obvious to folks that this is an ethno-nationalist state, that this is a state that only protects Jewish people, that gives a so-called right of return to all Jewish people, no matter where they're from around the world, and protects them while not protecting Arabs. And it's an expansionist state that's grown and grown and grown in the region. And to do so, they've been pushing Arab people off of their home for years and years, which, about 70% of the people in Gaza now are people who have been pushed off of other places in Palestine and forced into Gaza. So the idea that we end this system of apartheid and allow these people to go back to their homes, that's a call for genocide. Like you're out of your mind. It's always projection. It's weird how the imperialist propaganda always comes back to projection. You guys are calling for genocide. No, motherfuckers, you're doing a genocide.
That's absolutely right. And even at the more micro level, all the very specific things that they say about the Palestinian resistance forces in order to dehumanize are actually the things that they do themselves that the Palestinians don't. Shout out to Comrade Dust James. Hi, all. Victory to the Palestinian resistance. Yeah, absolutely. We have a question here from Comrade Keb. Can you invite Mr. Chomsky in a meeting next time? We absolutely can. We plan on hopefully at some point having him and BJ on to discuss their joint book, The Withdrawal. But we do have an interview with Professor Chomsky that we featured in the Journal of American Socialist Studies, issue 2, which you can find and buy yourself a cheap Midwestern Marx People's Prices copy at midwesternmarx.com/books. But after this truce was achieved, I wanted to pull up some of the sentiments that came from the murderous and bloodthirsty Biden administration, where they said that there was no sense that the pause would turn into a lengthier ceasefire, senior administration official said. And there is some concern in the administration about an unintended consequence of the pause. What is the unintended consequence? Well, that it would allow journalists broader access to Gaza and the opportunity to further illuminate the devastation there and turn public opinion against Israel. Oh, you mean the consequence would be that it would be easier for the truth to get out there? It's completely absurd, but your thoughts, Eddie?
I mean, yeah, I don't know what to call it other than absurd. I almost didn't believe this when you told me about it, but I mean, it seems like the Biden White House has no shame with the statements that they're putting out about Israel, between this saying, can't, or a ceasefire is bad because it might allow journalists to expose what Israel's actually doing, or when Karine Jean-Pierre called those calling for a ceasefire disgraceful and repugnant. It's like these people have no shame. They have no shame in how they worship war, how they push for war, how they condemn anybody who is against their war or who exposes to the world what they're actually doing. They treat you like shit if you tell the world the truth. And it's I had something else to say, but now it slipped my mind.
And one of the things that I notice every time they report the amount of people that have been killed by Israel, which are numbers that themselves, we were talking about this. I was talking about this with Danny a few broadcasts ago, but they seem low considering the amount of devastation and the amount of people that still haven't been found and that are probably under
Right.
the
Their
rubble
homes.
of. Yeah. So,
I
but they
remembered what I was
still.
going to say, by the way. Sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Not to interrupt you if you have a good point, but I was going to say what the Biden administration is doing, and with statements like this, they're even more depraved than like the Reagan administration and previous
Right.
administrations when it came to Israel. We covered this on TikTok, and I saw you and Noah covered it in the last stream. There were times where Israel was doing what they're doing now, like carpet bombing West Beirut, and Reagan called them up and said, "Stop! You know, the
Mm,
world is disgusted by what you're doing. This is going to put the Israel-U.S. relationship at risk." Biden's not doing that. Biden's not telling Israel to stop. He's calling the people who are calling out Israel's genocide disgraceful and repugnant, and talking
right.
down to them and being condescending towards them and telling them they need to vote for him, otherwise they hate democracy. Like, this is such a disgusting regime that's currently in power in the U.S. And it's just mind-boggling to me that there's still a lot of people have turned, but there are still people out there who are saying, you know, vote blue no matter who. We got to vote for Biden, the lesser of two evils. Like, this guy isn't even the lesser of two evils compared to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan. Okay,
Right.
he's not the lesser of two evils compared to anyone. This is one of the most evil administrations we've ever seen. And what other examples do you need besides this? We can't have a ceasefire. The world might find out we're sponsoring genocide. What? Did that come out of Hitler's Germany? Did that come out of Nazi Germany? No, that came out of the Biden administration in 2023 United States.
Absolutely. As Gup says here, newsflash: U.S. says it's powerless to stop the genocide that is directly funded and supplied by them. Absolutely, and that's important for us to keep in mind because it affects us. It's our families that have been made addicted to drugs thanks to the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex. It's our cities that have their infrastructure collapsing. So as we're indebted by various means, as we continue to struggle to get by and pay bills, and 60 to 70% of Americans struggle paycheck to paycheck. These are people that are a couple paychecks away from being on the streets, and wandering around along with the 600,000 other folks that are homeless in our country, and a country with 33 times as many empty homes as homeless people. So um, we have all of this going on here, and then all of the tax revenue that the state gets from us is being used on empire. It's being used to send hundreds of billions of dollars to the Nazis in Ukraine, and now the fascist Nazis, Zionists, that are carrying forth a genocide right before our very eyes. A genocide that the vast majority of the American people have shown poll after poll not to be in favor of. The vast majority of the American people are in favor of a ceasefire. It's like 80 something percent within the party of the president, the Democratic Party. So the fact that Biden has reiterated that there's going to be no ceasefire under his administration, that's a no-go, an impossibility, shows how democratic truly the U.S. is. It's absurd. We invade the rest of the world under the pretext of spreading democracy and human rights and defending these things. But both of these are things that the U.S. people do not have. Where's our democracy? If our people favor the ceasefire of a genocide that's funded by our tax dollars, and the president says, nah, not going to happen, how the hell is that democratic? How do we value human rights when Israel is violating every possible, international law? And the UN is basically admitting this, and various UN officials are admitting this, and we don't do anything about it. We veto attempts at a ceasefire that are voted massively in favor by the global majority, and we fund and equip them with the things that they need in order to carry forth this genocide. It's completely despicable, two-faced, and the archetypical hypocrisy of U.S. imperialism.
And I flipped on MSNBC this morning, and it was almost unbelievable. They had three pundits on who all, like, I don't know why they bring out three pundits who all think the exact same thing. I guess it creates this false sense of legitimacy, or a false sense that this is the majority opinion. But
Right.
they said, for one, that all the third party candidates are only running because they have no critique of the system. They just are hungry for power and want to be president, which, we have our critiques of every third party campaign, but that doesn't describe any of them, right? All of them are saying that the two party duopoly is broken. We don't have a democracy. We have a government that's sponsoring genocide, even though the majority of the population is against it. So we need an alternative option, right? And MSNBC and CNN just ignore that. They lie about these candidates. They smear these candidates, and then they give this big long segment lecturing people about how right now is not the time. And they have this guy say, if you vote for anyone other than Joe Biden and Donald Trump wins, but not only are you voting for Donald Trump, not only is a third party vote to vote for Donald Trump, but you're voting to destroy this country as we know it, to destroy democracy as we know it. Like, what world do these people live in? Well, and you realize then that the media is when you see segments like that, it's this really stark realization, like the media isn't just kind of wrong. They're not just bad at their job. No, they're actively lying to you on behalf of the bourgeoisie. You could pretty much take whatever the opposite of what the media says and assume that to be true, right? People have this naivety about the media that they're mostly right, but they get a few things wrong, right? That's how like Destiny looks at the media. No, the media is the bourgeoisie's way, their method, their of controlling information, and its function is to lie to the public and to get the public to go along with what's in the interest of a small fraction of society, those who own capital, the ruling capitalist class. So don't be naive about the media, right? So many people realize that they're lying to us about Palestine, because we're able to see on our social media feeds what's actually going on. And, our Arab friends have told us that they've been lying about us for years. So don't just assume the media is only lying about Palestine. If they're lying about Palestine, they're lying about Ukraine. They're lying about, all of these regime change wars. They're lying about the fact that we can't have Medicare for all, that we can't have universal health care. They're lying about the fact that they can't fix the road. They're lying about the fact that they have to send billions of dollars to Ukraine and Israel, but they can't do anything about all the trains that are derailing in places like East Palestine, Ohio. They're lying. It's the media's whole job. They're a bunch of liars. And the people who work for the media, I can't imagine being that much of a spineless scumbag. But that's what they are. Don't be naive. Don't be naive and think the media just makes mistakes. No, they are intentionally manipulating and deceiving you when it comes to every major geopolitical issue or domestic political issue.
And it's been shown statistically that it works. I'm rereading Parenti's Inventing Reality, which I know you just recently finished. And one of the studies that it cites, it's a bit dated, but I think this is likely still true. I haven't looked it up, but the concerns that are in the media correlate to what people answer in various polls as what their political concerns are. And what does that tell you? That the media has, at least within a certain portion of the population, the capacity, the power, the control over what people are concerned about, over what issues, one group of people gets hysterical about and another group of people gets hysterical about for opposite reasons. And it's a very effective machine of ideological control, a very effective ideological non-state apparatus, but that functions in a dialectical relationship with the state and the interests that the state represent, which is the interest of private capital, that a lot of times are the same monopoly capitalists that own these medias. But to give an example of what Eddie is mentioning, there was recently an article that was supposed to be published on Harvard Law Review on making a legal case for, let me see if I pulled up I pulled up the wrong one. Making a legal case for the for the fact that what's going on now in Palestine is a genocide, and the article was pulled down. The article was supposed to be published, and then one of the editors, I guess, read it and consulted with the rest of the editorial board, and 60-something% of them voted against publishing the article and in favor of removing it. And I just want to read the paragraph with how the article starts. It says, "Genocide is a crime. It is a legal framework. It is unfolding in Gaza. And yet, the inertia of legal academia, especially in the United States, has been chilling. Clearly, it is much easier to dissect the case law rather than navigate the reality of death. It is much easier to consider genocide in the past tense rather than contend with it in the present. Legal scholars tend to sharpen their pens after the smell of death has dissipated and moral clarity is no longer urgent." And that is, just another way of speaking about what, Eddie has been labeling for years on end hindsight anti-imperialism. There's a whole lot of people that, 20, 30 years down the line will write great books dissecting the ongoing genocide, the people that funded it, doing all of this great research. But what are they doing now? Where is their why aren't they on the right side of history now? It's because they deeply trust these apparatuses of imperialism that lie to us, consistently lie to us, but they believe them. They believe them now, and they end up always on the wrong side of history until it gets to a point where it no longer matters whether you accept that the WMD stories was complete bullshit, or the story of Gaddafi giving Viagra to his soldiers to rape people is complete bullshit. Like, once it doesn't matter because it's post facto, post what they wanted to achieve, then if you're an anti-imperialist there, it's like, what's the fucking point? We don't need you to be an anti-imperialist 20 years down the line. We don't need you to defend Palestine from this ongoing genocide 20 years down the line. Defend it fucking now. Defend it now as the bombs are dropping, as more than 7,000 kids have died, more than 5,000 women, 99% of the people dying are civilians. Like, defend it now. It's clear to anyone who looks at all of the facts and does even the slightest bit of research that this is an ongoing genocide of a population that has lived under occupation for more than 75 years, and that has been living, at least in the last 20 years, the population of Gaza, in what has been described by Israeli officials themselves as a concentration camp and an open-air prison. So the facts are there. Stop being fooled. Stop having your emotions manipulated in order to support the most horrendous thing humanity can do against humanity, which is a genocide, an ethnic cleansing of a people that are in their land and simply trying to defend it and live in the lands that they've lived for 8, 9, 10 generations.
Yeah, but think about all the good that it did, 12 years after Libya was invaded, when everybody realized that Gaddafi didn't actually give his soldiers Viagra, and all those people who fell for it realized they were wrong. It does a lot of good now when they complain about Obama overthrowing Libya. No, but that's exactly it. And it's these like people who fall for the atrocity propaganda, right? I've had some of the most infuriating conversations I've had about Palestine are people who will only say, but they're raping babies in front of their parents. Like, first of all, show me the evidence. Show me the evidence for that. There's no evidence for that. There's no evidence for the babies in the ovens. There's no evidence for 40 beheaded children, yet these stories were propagated by the Western media. And it's like, where were you when Israel was killing one Palestinian child per day before this? Like, and it's so annoying when, in your everyday life, you deal with people who are just being informed, who just learned that the conflict exists on October 7th, right? They want to act like experts and tell you how horrible it is, what's going on, and what the Palestinians are doing. Like, dude, we've been following this day by day for like 3 years. You pull your head out of your butt. And, you can't expect every regular civilian to be educated about these things. But if you're going to call yourself a Marxist, if you're going to call yourself a socialist and pretend to be into geopolitics and know about these things, and, as a socialist, really what you're saying is I'm someone who can lead the working class to the seizure of political power and the end of capitalism. If you're calling yourself a socialist and then cheering on imperialism, like, stop, read. Stop, read anything other than Wikipedia.
I was talking to one of our directors, Tom Riggins, and he was telling me he gets this paper from this group of New York Trots. I can't remember what it's called. It's called Work or Something. And the headline a few weeks ago was, "We must stand up with Israel." And, the headlines last year were, "We must stand up with Ukraine." It's like, what? How are you a Marxist if literally every position that you take politically is just a rehashed version of what U.S. imperialism says, except sprinkled and embellished with Marxist terminology? It's ridiculous. And even this issue, one of the slogans that has come out of it, there's two of them. One of them is very beautiful, which is you don't have to be Muslim to stand with Palestine. You have to be human. But the other one is that this is not a political issue. This is a human issue. This is a struggle of humanity fighting against the most atrocious thing humanity can do to itself, which is genocide. This completely cuts the political spectrum. There's no left and right divide here. It's like, are you going to stand in favor of a genocide funded and equipped by American taxpayer money, or are you going to fight like hell against it so that 20 years down the line you could sleep, so that today you could sleep, so that next week I wouldn't be able to sleep with myself. I was saying this last stream. How do these people sleep with themselves? Especially there's a class of people clearly benefiting from it. They're sleeping in Tempur-Pedic pillows and mattresses and silk sheets, and it's a little easier to sleep in those conditions and to forget what you're supporting by your actions. But how can regular people sleep when they reiterate a lot of this bunk? So it's at the personal level, like, how are you going to be able to deal with yourself when what what happens is something similar to the post Second World War situation, where people are forced to realize, holy shit, we supported a genocidal government. How am I gonna, that guilt, is that a guilt you want down the line, or do you want to fight now for what's right and be on the right side of history?
Exactly. I mean, I can't think of any better way to say it than that. Are you going to stand with genocide or are you not? And like people love to say, oh, how did Hitler do that in Germany? How did he get so many people to, side in favor of genocide? And a lot of the same people who say that are the ones cheering on Israel right now. Like, dumbasses, you don't think Hitler had propagandists? Who do you think Joseph Goebbels was? They used the media to manipulate people into supporting genocide. And that's what they're doing to you. And you think you're so smart because you can look back historically at a genocide 60 years ago, you're more than 60 years, a genocide years and years ago that everybody condemns now because we have the aid of hindsight and we can look back historically. But when you're being lied to about a genocide right in front of your face, and when you can see that genocide on Twitter every day, but you're choosing to bury your head in the sand, you're supporting it. You're supporting it because it's convenient. The powers that be support it. You don't want to, risk losing your job. But you don't think that's what the conditions were like for people in fascist Germany. This is what fascist states do. They tell lies to manipulate people and get you to support them. So are you going to be a moron and ignorant and be tricked by these lies and side with the mass murder of little babies? Or are you going to say, hey, guess what? Babies don't deserve to be killed. They don't deserve to have their electricity cut off. Not just babies, but all the people in Palestine.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Thank you so much to Magala Len for the $5 Canadian. It's a People's Funded Institute, so these donations are tremendously appreciated. I feel like there's a component of sexual blackmail. Joe Biden is such a creep, and Mossad history tells me this might be an issue. Yeah, I've heard that argument with RFK. That RFK's vehement support for Israel is rooted in the fact that they probably have some dirt on him, something related to him having been on Jeffrey Epstein's plane and other stuff. So I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them, but I do think that this is a larger systematic thing. That the same way that we understand that Ukraine functions as a proxy in the US's war against Russia, Taiwan as a proxy in the US's war against China. I think, sadly, but this ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people, it's a form of a proxy in a larger regional war against Iran. And disconnected is really the U.S. trying to take on their geopolitical axis of evil in the form of Iran, Russia, and China. And this is an analysis that I think has been very astutely made by Michael Hudson. So I don't know. I think that the U.S. generally does consider that this extermination of the Palestinian people, or at least the kicking of them out of Gaza in order to build the Ben Gurion Canal, and in order to carry out the IMEC, the India Mid East Economic Corridor. I think that they have launched this in order to achieve those ends, but have seen, because of the protests, because of the very clear state of affairs in the information war tipping towards the Palestinian side, that if they keep this for much longer, their consequences could be very serious. Because how do we watched the video a few streams ago. How do you go back to normal when you just realize that your politicians and the media lied to you about a genocide in front of your face? How do you go back to normal? How do you go back to trusting these same institutions after they did the most heinous thing you could do in the world and lied to you about it repeatedly when the truth was out there, to be found? And the vast majority of people were already engaging with it because of, you can see in the polls how many people side with Palestine and for a ceasefire. So um, I don't know. What are your thoughts, Eddie? I'm rambling by now.
No, it's true. I mean, it's good analysis, and you never know, like, the ins and outs and the details of these things tend to not come out for a while, right? Like, when I say everybody's an anti-imperialist in hindsight, I mean, like, with the Iraq War, all the Marxists and communists or Marxist-Leninists, people like Michael Parenti, were against the Iraq War from the beginning because they saw it for what it was, a war for oil. They, because of the Marxist method, we understand that these wars don't happen for no reason, right? We never, when George Bush and his administration was telling us we need to invade Iraq, we need to invade Afghanistan for freedom and democracy, the Michael Parentis of the world, the Marxist Leninists of the world never believed them. We said, no, of course not. The government doesn't act for freedom and democracy. The capitalist ruling class doesn't do things for freedom and democracy. They're doing this for capital expansion, right? But years later, we come to find out about the Iraq War that Judith Miller of the New York Times was being fed stories by the CIA that weren't true, and she was publishing them on the front page. We learned that there was never any evidence of weapons of mass destruction, despite the fact that Colin Powell went before Congress and said there was evidence of weapons of mass destruction. Right? People like us, the Marxist-Leninists with the Marxist materialist method, were never fooled by this. Right? We never believed Colin Powell. We never believed Judith Miller. But there were a lot of people who believed them. We said, "Oh no, Saddam Hussein bad. Maybe we should invade Iraq. Maybe they do have weapons of mass destruction." And as more information came out, as we found out the whole war was constructed on lies, those people said, okay, well, now I condemn the Iraq war that I once supported. Now that I know it was based on lies, right? That's anti-imperialism in hindsight. The trick is to never trust them. Colin Powell was never telling you the truth, right? CNN and the New York Times were never telling you the truth. They were always mouthpieces and puppets of the capitalist ruling class, which has their own interests, which are rooted in the expansion of capital and the appropriation of surplus value. So, we might find out later, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that certain stories were fabricated by the Israeli military. We might find out that Mossad has a video of Joe Biden doing something incriminating that they're using to blackmail him, right? But the point is to be against the imperialist intervention even before more information starts leaking out about it. But is that a possibility that Mossad has something on Biden? Absolutely. There's a possibility that someone at AIPAC has something on Biden, the Israeli lobby, right? We won't know the details of this till later, but we can see that broadly, Israel is a U.S. neo-colonial project, which is why they support them through and through. It's to protect their economic interests in the so-called Middle East.
No, absolutely. And when you have a systematic Marxist analysis of the world, which is another way of saying when you have a correct understanding of the world, because all that a Marxist analysis is taking the world how it comes in, concretely analyzing the concrete. When you have this analysis, it's absurd thinking about bourgeois media, capitalist media, the media of the elite, as telling us anything that is not already what the elite want us to know about the actions that they're carrying forth. There's only very, very few exceptions historically that you can point at as being, as going contrary to the structural tendency of the system that we live in. These mainstream media outlets and a lot of the supposedly alternative media that's also has some of the similar structures and fundings and ideological assumptions as the mainstream media ones, they're the outlets of the elite. They're the ideology. It's not just this thing that exists in in the ether, and you know, it's embodied, and it's embodied in institutions, it's embodied in individuals, and that's how it spreads. And these are the institutions that embody bourgeois ideology. And if we're looking at the crimes of the capitalist class in the stage of a decaying neo-imperialism, we must be, you know, completely insane to think that their class's media is going to tell us the truth. We still got to read it to know what their narratives are, but we must be insane to trust it. We can't trust it. Their whole basis is lies and distortions in order to further the interest of the class that owns the newspaper media, the paper media, the TV media, all this media. You think you, as the owner of an enterprise that benefits from this, are going to let journalists come in and tell the truth in your paper? It's absurd. It's against your material interest. There doesn't have to be a formal conspiracy, as I think George Carlin said in a famous talk show discussion with someone else who was like, "Oh, you know, you're framing this as this crazy conspiracy." There doesn't have to be a conspiracy when material interests align.
And that's when you read Parenti's Inventing Reality, it makes perfect sense when he describes it the way news outlets and even entertainment media, especially entertainment media, tailor their coverage to what advertisers want. Right? If you start if CNN notices some things that are wonky with COVID and the way the vaccine's being rolled out, and they publish something skeptical, well, guess what? Their main advertiser is Pfizer. Who's not going to advertise with them? Pfizer. What's that going to do? The shareholders and owners at CNN are going to have their surplus value decreased because they're getting less advertising. What do capitalists hate more than anything else? Their profit and their surplus value decreasing. We all know this is a fact of life under capitalism. Nobody, the most conservative person, well, maybe like the Koch brothers, but pretty much nobody would disagree that capitalists put profit before anything. So of course they're not gonna publish things that hurt their advertisers or that reflect negatively on their advertisers. And capitalism has been developing for hundreds of years at this point. So most of the major movie studios, most of the major outlets, most of the major networks have censorship boards. They literally have boards where movies and art and news reports are submitted to, and they check them to make sure they're ideologically in line, right? And you can call that a conspiracy if you want. It's not. It's the reality, right? You can look these up. The networks have these boards, and it's because over time they've developed ways to keep their product ideologically in line with what the ruling class wants, so they don't encounter problems, so they don't encounter resistance, and they can continue to just appropriate surplus value. So it's not a conspiracy. It's very obvious. The people who rule the world and who rule America especially are the people who own capital. Their interests are relatively similar, and they're going to put their interests above anything else and push an ideology that helps further their interests.
Absolutely right, brother. Thank you so much to the comrade Starback for the $10 or €10 super chat. Thank you so much, brother. Yeah, fair points, but do you condemn Hamas?
Hamas.
That's hilarious. I wanted to pull up this video of Eddie saying something, joking with this thing.
Being killed. But more importantly, do you condemn Hamas? You're not allowed to talk about Israel unless you condemn Hamas.
It's so dumb, but it's gold. I love it.
It turns out Sabra supports Israel too. The hummus I was eating.
My God.
Damn it.
Jesus. False consciousness in the hummus industry is real. Oh my God. But thank you so much, comrade, for that. I hadn't tried hummus until I was like 21. And then when I did, I bought like 4 little things of hummus and I just went at it for days.
It's good.
It's amazing.
Dude, I don't like Sacha Baron Cohen, but if you see, he does have a funny skit where he sits down with a Zionist and a Palestinian advocate, and he's pretending that he doesn't know what Hamas is, and he's talking about hummus. And then they both end up telling him, like, no, hummus is good. We both like hummus.
It's like, there you go. That's we have found a point of commonality. Oh man. Yeah, he's he's working very closely with the Israeli state. Minpress News put out a story a while back on it. But yeah, thank you so much, brother, for the $10, €10 super chat. It's a People's Funded Institute, so these are extremely appreciated. But when you were going at it there, Eddie, talking about the entertainment media, that functions as a really good segue to our next segment, and the fact that the actress Melissa Barrera was fired by the Scream movie series. I think they're up to like Scream 7. I mean, how many movies can you do of the same like fucking
No shit. They weren't even
ghost
that good in the
thing?
first place. Like, who is that big of a Scream fan?
The scary movie version of Scream was better than Scream itself.
Honestly.
But Melissa Barrera fired because of her pro-Palestine statements, anti-genocide statements, really. And so let's give it a watch. You were breaking down the story. Let's give that a watch and then react to some connected stories on the topic.
Actress Melissa Barrera has been dropped from the new Scream movie simply for making social media posts in favor of Palestine. And this reminds me of the time that George Lucas said there was more freedom in the Soviet Union's film industry than there is in America's. This is how ideological control is enforced in Hollywood. If you don't go along with the mainstream media narratives, you won't find work. And in that way, they use celebrities and movies to brainwash us from the top down. The idea that we have free speech in this country is laughable. We're one of the most ideologically controlled countries on the planet. They're not letting any pro-Palestinian voices into the entertainment media or the news media. Solidarity with this actress, the people who fired her are pure scum.
Absolutely, and it shows the control that they have over all institutions, over the institutions of the news, the so-called objective institutions, and the entertainment ones, and it's all interconnected to everything else. So it'd be foolish to think that if the empire has its interest set on combating communism, that it's not going to do, the communist raids of Hollywood that it did shortly after the end of the Second World War, during the beginning of the Cold War. If the empire has its eyes set on genociding the Palestinian people as cleverly as it can without losing, the public, in the information war, at least not too badly. If that's what their eyes are set on, then they're not going to be letting actresses who have influence on the people comment. They're not going to let them comment favorably on Palestine. And what this does is, it's not just fire Melissa, but it sends a message to other actors who might be scrolling through Twitter and Instagram and seeing the tragic situation that the Palestinian people are in, and might feel like using their outlets that can reach millions of people to communicate the fact that there's a genocide going on and that we can stop it if we organize against it. So it's a message that is sent to other actors, so that the ones that are cowardly enough not to speak up decide to not speak up because they don't want to lose their job.
Right. We were just talking about how the entertainment media is so tightly ideologically controlled. This is another example. Like, you speak out against the wrong things and you're fired. And there's been a lot of talk about this in comedy recently in relation to guys like Kevin Hart. And they've basically been getting criticized for selling their soul, because these other comedians are like, you don't get that big in Hollywood unless you will toe the line, refuse to say anything that offends them, and push what they want ideologically, which at the end of the day is neoliberal economics and neoliberal politics. So these free speech conversations that you have with people in America are so insane. They talk about how they support free speech and they want freedom of speech, but movie studios should be allowed to censor people because they're private. They're privately owned. Guys, everything in the country is privately owned. Everything in the country is owned by some shareholder on Wall Street who you've never met in your life. Everything is owned. Just because it's privately owned doesn't mean it's owned by your neighbor. Doesn't mean it's owned by your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister. It's owned by some giant conglomerate. It's owned by some corporate shareholder who's got more wealth than you can ever even comprehend. And they are firing anybody who tells the truth. And they're doing this in the entertainment media. And of course, they're doing this in the news media, right? Where they actually report on politics. Of course, they're not going to let a political journalist get on who's actually telling you the truth about U.S. imperialism and about capitalism. So, of course, there's going to be censorship under the system. So to claim that, us talking about censorship is conspiracy theory because, these interests don't align. No, they absolutely align. The interests of capital owners have aligned for a long time, and they've controlled the information supply for a long time. They've actually become very good at filtering out information to make sure that the truth doesn't get out. And it's becoming harder for them because of institutes like this and because of social media and other developments, but they're very good at censoring people. And it's almost always the private sector driving the censorship, right? So this idea that we should just accept infringements on our constitutional right to freedom of speech because the people censoring us are from the private sector. Who gives a shit if they're from the private sector? The most powerful people in the country are from the private sector. The government, the public sector that you hate so much, is so bad because it's controlled by the private sector, because it's controlled by the capitalists. So I don't know. I just think that's absurd when people say I'm for freedom of speech, but the private sector should be able to censor us. No, the private sector is the one driving the censorship in this country.
Right, and part of the reason why the censorship works is that we are socialized. We are made into individuals. We become who we are in these societies that have generationally had this same form of thinking that just ends up getting adjusted to the specific things that are required of the era that one is living in. So we already have the assumptions. We're socialized to have the assumptions and the worldview of the media that's feeding us these lies, and that's what makes it really difficult to break through it. But a lot more young people are breaking through that, and it becomes easier to break through that in a society where you realize that you have a futureless future in front of you, where you're crippled by debt because God forbid you want to get an education, or God forbid you get sick or want to own a home, where you realize that regardless of whatever job you get, even if you have a 4-year degree, it's going to be a struggle at the end of the month to pay bills, to pay for the necessaries of life. It's a lot easier under those circumstances becoming constant in your life to be like, are the people that are keeping me in these conditions, are they telling me the truth about X, Y, or Z? And eventually, as soon as it breaks in one era, in one space, in one event, it'll break in all the other ones, and it becomes a lot easier for one to question the whole system. So um, that's another part of it, right? This news also expects us to have been socialized and to have come to accept the worldviews that also presuppose the news that these stations are putting out. Um, in connection, by the way, to what we were talking about, Jenny Ortega, who I think is a little bit more of a recognized
Jenna.
artist. Jenna. Oh, I thought it was Jenny the whole time. I haven't
Well,
seen
I'm in love
Wednesday.
with her, so I would know.
I haven't seen Wednesday. I haven't seen any of her work. I just know that she became a meme. There was a meme of her a while back where she's like, it was the structure of the meme was like they ask her what book she's reading, and then people were like, "The Communist Manifesto, Capital, Hegel's Signs of Logic," or something. And I think I got to know her because of the meme, and I think my wife saw Wednesday. I didn't get to see it. But she's part of this Scream franchise, and after they fired Melissa, she also quit in solidarity with her. So that's an extremely courageous action. There's I'm sure a lot of money that was left on the table there in order to stand by her principles. We just saw something similar. The agency that Susan Sarandon was signed to, they fired her because of the positions that she's taken against the genocide of the Palestinian people. So these artists or influencers have a lot to lose when they speak truth to power, and it's beautiful to see when some of them have the courage to do so, and even if they get reprimanded, they take it on the chin and they keep moving forward, having the sort of honor of knowing that they stood on the right side of history and that the people that fired them stood with the forces that hate humanity, that destroy humanity, and that are carrying forth one of the most heinous things that humanity can do, which is a genocide.
Yeah, I think that basically sums up the tweet I put out. Like the people who have been fired for standing up for Palestine, they're heroes and they'll be remembered that way historically. Just like we look at people who stood up against Nazi Germany, like the communists who fought against Nazism and fascism from the early days, right? Not even from post rise to power, but as it was coming to power, they recognized it for what it was and attacked it. We look back upon those people as heroes, people like Antonio Gramsci, right? Same thing. People like Jenna Ortega are standing up against fascism, and they're being fired by the ruling class for standing up against a fascist genocide. And hopefully, historically, we look back at this the same way. We look back at these scumbags running the movie studios the same way that we look back at William Randolph Hearst, who was aiding and doing propaganda for the Nazis, who was a big fan of Hitler, even though he owned, and owned a large number of the newspapers here in the United States. Right? Israel is a fascist state. Make no mistake about it. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, they have propaganda to trick you into thinking they're not a fascist state, just like every fascist state does, but they are. And everybody who's cheering on their genocide right now, the Sacha Baron Cohens of the world, history will not look back on them fondly.
Absolutely. And I went into a little rant about this last stream towards the end, but for people that call themselves Marxists, this understanding of fascism, it needs to be a little bit more refined, at least from what I see from a lot of the people that I engage with that have the hammer and sickle in their bio. They're approaching the question of fascism from a very idealist point of view. So if you're in favor or present yourself as in favor of like LGBTQ rights, as Israel does, how do you call them fascist? If they're pro LGBTQ and fascism is the conservatives that are against all these things going on now. So that's a very idealist understanding of what fascism is. We need to have a materialist, a specifically historical materialist understanding of what fascism is, and see fascism as the form that capitalism takes, specifically capitalist imperialism takes in periods of crisis, when either one, there's the threat of the working class making significant advances, or a revolutionary break with the existing order, or two, regardless of where the working class is, there's a very significant drop in the rate of profits, as there was in Italy, that makes it viable for the capitalist class, whether the new monies or the old aristocratic monies, to fund the fascist movement so that it can repress and tear back all of the gains that the working class or that oppressed communities were able to make in the periods before the fascist takeover. So that requires a materialist analysis of fascism. And when you have that, you see that it's extremely clear that Israel is a fascist state, regardless of all these other connections that you have between some of the early Zionists and the Nazis. Like, study the political economy of Israel, and it becomes evident, that it's a fascist state. The Starback, thank you so much, brother, for the
same with Ukraine, by the way. Sorry, I just have to add that, because the similarities between Israel and Ukraine are so out in the open and obvious. That is what a fascist state looks like. But.
Are you saying that the anarchists who were comparing Ukraine to Palestine were wrong?
I haven't even seen anyone make that comparison, but I know in my head that it exists, that those people are out there.
There was anarchists going to fight in Ukraine at the beginning of it. Those brigades of like Reddit American anarchists going to Ukraine to fight, because they were drawing this comparison of Ukraine being like Palestine fighting against the invaders and the occupiers.
Wow.
All the while, they're saying that they're going to turn Ukraine into like another Israel.
It's almost unbelievable, because like I've never met an anarchist who's that dedicated. Like, I can't believe that exists.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, brother Starback, for another €5 super chat. California schools must now teach how to recognize fake news through media literacy lessons in English, science, math, and history at every grade level. So if they were actually teaching that, if they were actually teaching critical thinking, that would be excellent. But what they're going to teach is how people who are indoctrinated by the dominant form of ideology can be manipulated to a point where when they see alternative media, they consider that to be propaganda and fake news. What they're going to probably teach is how is it that we can manipulate people to a point that when they turn on Midwestern Marks, when they turn on Telesur, RT, Press TV, CG, TN, all these other alternative medias, Al Jazeera. How can we have these sort of instant reactions developed in them such that when they see these claims, they're like, oh, these people are anti-Semitic, or oh, these people are Putin propagandists. So I think if we consider, what these schools represent, which are like what the church was during the feudal era is what schools are now. Schools are like the centers of the development of bourgeois ideology that then, flows, it trickles down, to quote Comrade Reagan, it trickles down into the masses through the media, the NGOs, and other institutions. But so I can't imagine the case being that they're actually teaching media literacy, critical thinking, and how to spot fake news, because that would mean how do you spot all of the mainstream media news and basically everything that the media is telling you
I
at any
think
given
what
moment.
Starbucks saying is they're teaching media literacy classes that teach people to see shows like ours and shut their brains
Oh,
and be like,
hopefully.
and recognize
Oh,
this
okay,
is
okay, yeah,
fake
yeah,
news.
yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. That's what I'm saying. Like, how do they indoctrinate people to the point where they turn us on and they turn all these other shows on, and they just have that automatic reaction? These are Putin propagandists. These are this is fake news. Um, which is it is interesting because I remember when we were organizing with Bernie, one of the ways that we would get Trump people to become more skeptical about everything else was like, well, you believe this is fake news. Why do you think the other stuff is not fake news? Why do you think the stuff that's in the history books is not fake news? How do we approach, how do we extend this skepticism beyond the sphere that their faction of the ruling class has limited to?
Right.
Thank you so much, Ross, the Institute's official sugar daddy. $10 super chat. It's me. I own everything. All those anti-Semites who are talking about the Jewish people owning everything and controlling everything, they're wrong. It's actually Ross, the Institute's sugar daddy, who owns absolutely everything. Thank you so much,
Ross
brother,
is
for
king.
the 10 euro super chat.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate you.
There's a question here that's pretty interesting. Let's address it before we go to our
Wait.
next
Do the other
answer.
super chat, then this one. Do the next super chat because I want to answer that one, then this one. Sorry,
Oh, okay.
because it's on topic.
Andrew Ray, thank you so much, brother, for the $5 super chat. To be fair, those Reddit anarchists in Ukraine were just spinning webs of propaganda.
That sounds more like the anarchists that I know, sitting on Reddit
Right.
and talking about how they're in Ukraine.
Mm. No, absolutely, yeah.
I
There
just
were a
can't
few
believe there
pictures
were
that I
actually
saw.
anarchists on the front lines dedicating their lives for what they believe in.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
they
yeah.
were.
I absolutely agree. Thank you so much, Andrew, for the $5 super chat. I did see some pictures, but those could very easily be faked. You just throw yourself in a uniform and just snap a selfie or something. Um, Thank you so much, Red Maze, for the $25 super chat. Oh boy, nice. Thank you. They say, I'm ignorant. What is cultural Marxism? Is it real? Tim Pool had an anti-communist guest on that said universities and the Democratic Party are controlled by some deep state Marxists. Have you seen that debate? Any comments on it? Yeah, I think I know which one you're talking about. I did see it. The guy was completely delusional. And I think that the person who he was debating was right in their response. The person was he was turning everything upside down. He was assuming that what they call cultural Marxism, which, by the way, as Marxists, we don't think exists. Not because there isn't a phenomenon, the thing that they're trying to categorize as cultural Marxism isn't real, but because it's not Marxism. It has nothing to do with Marxism. It's a creation of the ruling class that emerges in the post-war era, at the beginning of the Cold War. That it's the creation of the compatible left, a so-called left that has the aesthetics, that has the veneer of being radical, of being progressive, of being the most Marxist or the most left, but that in substance always agrees with imperialism, and it does so in various ways. Sometimes by explicitly supporting imperialism, as you see with Adorno and Horkheimer supporting the invasions of Vietnam, the bombing of Vietnam, the attacks on Nasser, etc., calling Nasser a fascist, like, it's fucking absurd. Or it takes other forms, such as developing the strong purity fetish that means that you condemn socialism and try to place yourself in this in-between position where you condemn imperialism and then you also condemn actually existing socialism, which is historically the only challenge that we've actually seen to capitalist imperialism. So those people who end up turning the analysis away from political economy and towards more culturalist understandings, towards identity politics that end up being very postmodernized in their pseudo-Marxism, that is a real phenomenon. It dominates the academy. It dominates some leftist organizations, and it dominates a lot of NGOs. And it's the general idea that the populace has received for what Marxism is. And it couldn't be any farther from Marxism. I've talked about this a million times on the stream, but it's actually rooted at the level of the philosophical outlook that they have because of their deeply rooted tribalism. It's rooted in not just postmodernism, but where does postmodernism go back to? It traces its roots to people like Nietzsche, if you go really back enough, to people like Heidegger and Schmidt, Nazi philosophers and legal theorists. And if you go even more back to the theorists that were systematizing the ideological reaction to the Enlightenment, to the movement that considers that there is such a thing as a common humanity, which now we might dismiss as like Western bourgeois universalism, but that it was the kernel that revolutions like the Haitian Revolution and that other historically progressive revolutions held on to in order to say, hey, how is it that on one side you say that there's a common humanity and that all men are created equal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but you keep us enslaved and you don't treat us as humans. We're very clearly human. So cultural Marxism has that lineage, and it has nothing in common in terms of substance with actual Marxism. That's why I would say that it doesn't exist, but it definitely is reality that benefits imperialism.
It's quite the interesting thing, and this was such a light bulb moment for me when I read Gabriel Rockhill and his work about all these Marxist, cultural Marxist thinkers like Adorno and Horkheimer and whoever else, who were actually propped up by the CIA and who actually took anti-socialist, anti-revolutionary, anti-Marxist positions, pro-imperialist positions, in all practical matters. Some of them supporting the Vietnam War, a lot of them condemning revolutionary workers' movements in their own country. So when Jordan Peterson and these right-wing grifters come out and fearmonger about cultural Marxism, what they're calling cultural Marxism is essentially postmodernism. It's CIA-funded neoliberal philosophy masquerading as Marxism. So then these folks like Jordan Peterson, who are the other side of that coin, basically point to these CIA-funded thinkers and say, that's Marxism. This identity politics, post-colonial studies, hyper-focus on gender, all of these things are Marxism. Don't you hate Marxism and agree with me? So it's this really smart trick where both the pseudo-Marxist thinkers and the thinkers like Peterson critiquing them and calling them Marxists are really doing a lot to conceal what Marxism actually is. To tell people that Marxism is a hyper obsession with identity politics, with gender, with sexuality, and it's anything but class theorizing, ABC theorizing. So these folks like Peterson, these right-wing grifters, play a really important role in telling people, no, that's actually Marxism, right? That's actually Marxism. Don't look any further into it. Marxism only has to do with identity politics. So it's sort of like two sides of the same coin. You have the pseudo-Marxist postmodernist thinkers that Rockhill destroys. You have these people like Zizek. And then you have people like Peterson who debates Zizek and says, yes, this is Marxism. When what you need is a Marxist-Leninist, someone like Gabriel Rockhill, to say, no, neither of you know what Marxism is. This is Marxism. Marxism is about economic class. I don't know what the hell you're talking about with all this gender theory and whatnot. So
Absolutely. And if anyone's interested, just go on YouTube and look up Gabriel Rockhill, Midwestern Marx. We have 3 good interviews. This one that deals with the 68 French theory thinkers and exploring the political economy of knowledge that created the conditions for them. The same thing here with Slavoj Žižek and then with the Frankfurt School. So make sure to check that out if you're interested. But also, I think, I addressed this sort of phenomenon of the compatible left, the cultural Marxists, and all these people in my book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism, which, by the way, you can get a free ebook copy of if you sign up to be a Patreon or a YouTube member, I think at the $10 scale. So consider doing that if you're interested and want to support financially the Institute. But philosophically, one of my favorite works on the subject of connecting these traditions to their philosophical roots is this big white book over here. It's called The Destruction of Reason by Georg Lukács. It's a book from 1848, I believe. It was hated by all of the Western Marxists, which today consider the 1924 idealist Lukács to be their father and the founder of Western Marxism. But that book is very good because it shows how it is that out of these developments in the mode of production, specifically the moment around the 1848 revolutions where the bourgeoisie becomes a reactionary class. It's no longer this progressive class moving history forward, but it becomes a reactionary class holding back progress. The turn in at the ideological level is away from Hegel and Kant and the sort of German Enlightenment movement of accepting, a common humanity, accepting the notions of progress, freedom, of all these things, towards a more Nietzschean, Schopenhauer, Edward von Hartmann turn, which is pessimism, irrationalism, the questioning of reason, which was central to the Enlightenment, the questioning of progress. And all of that ends up getting recaptured in figures like Martin Heidegger and Carl Schmitt in a similar difficult period in the post-war era, post-First World War, pre-Second World War era in Germany, right? Germany was devastated. And out of that context, you have in 1927 the publication of Being in Time. And then this ends up getting incorporated in postmodernism and in the tendencies that come out of France with French theory, and some of the tendencies that come out of the Frankfurt School. Remember that Marcuse, for instance, was a student of Heidegger. And some of his earliest texts are trying to combine Heideggerianism with Marxism. So this whole tendency bleeds into academic Marxism, and it gets known and it gets proliferated intentionally as what Marxism is. So we have to reject that. None of that's Marxism. It's all bunk. There's some parts that are interesting to read, but I still read some of it. But it's not Marxism. If you really want the tradition of Marxism, look at the people that actually did something on the ground. The people that were organizing, that were trying to construct socialism or fighting for it through parties and various other organizations.
That's why VJ makes one of my favorite points ever when he's talking about Ho Chi Minh. Because people talk about Stalin and Ho Chi Minh and these folks, and they're like, yeah, they were good leaders, but they didn't write any theory. Sure, they were part of revolutionary processes, but they didn't write any theory. And Vijay's like, read about the early governance of Vietnam. Read what Ho Chi Minh was writing. What do you mean that's not theory? He's thinking, how do we plan a socialist economy? How do we build a socialist economy? How do we overthrow our colonizers and then defeat the imperialists, the capitalist imperialists who are going to invade, and build a stable socialist economy? The things that he learned from that, the mistakes that he made in trying to do that, that is theory, right? That is theory, because we're dialectical materialists. We learn from practice. We learn from what happened in reality. That's why these people who call you a tanky, if you bring up existing socialism, are completely missing the point. The point is to learn from socialist projects of the past. That's what the whole theory is based on. Learning from our practice, learning from from reality, not inventing some magical, mystical, utopian form of socialism in our heads. And then trying to achieve that, or weighing every existing socialist experiment in comparison to that. Look at the debates within the Communist Party of China in their early years. They are constantly looking at what the Soviet Union did. Are they saying, oh, Stalin, our great leader, everything he did was correct, we must follow him like he is a god? No, they're saying, okay, that's wrong, let's throw that out. But this was a good idea, let's take that. That was a good idea. Let's take that. This didn't work. They did that better in Yugoslavia, so we're going to take that. It's picking and choosing. It's leaving out what didn't work and bringing in what did work. Yeah.
Are you saying the Marxist worldview is rooted in materialism
Eh?
and in the primacy of real life over the realm of ideas? What? That's ludicrous. No, but you're absolutely right. And it makes perfect sense if you're actually understanding the world how it comes to you, which is the best way to do this is through the dialectical materialist worldview. Thank you so much, Red Maze, for another $10 super chat. They say thank you for thoughtful answers, comrades. Yes, of course. And these sorts of questions will get us rambling on and on and on for hours. So thank you so much for asking them and for forcing us to continue to hammer these things out. I always try to keep in mind this dictum, this Latin dictum, repetitio est mater studiorum, that repetition is the mother of all knowledge. And it's important to repeat these things over and over and over again. Not only do we hone the way that we talk about it in the process, but it also helps people learn it. Without repetition, there can be no knowledge. If you're just encountering a narrative for the first time ever, it's going to be very hard to remember it, to learn it. It becomes much easier once you continuously encounter that narrative or narratives like that. So thank you so much for the $10 super chat, comrade. Pato Kozak, thank you so much for the $50 from Argentina. I'm really sorry, dude. You have a hard time ahead of you. So, our communist prayers will be with you. Milei has become a puppet of Mauricio Macri at this point. Yeah. I've been a lot of Pino Solanas documentaries, and they still hold up to this day. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the intensification of the crisis and the inflation and the monetary situation in Argentina is rooted in the loan. I think it was like $56 billion that the IMF gave to Argentina under Macri in order to stimulate the economy. And as it always happens, and maybe does a little bit for a short amount of time, and then it all comes crumbling down. And it just so happened to do so under the period of Alberto Fernandez, who's also, a very vacillating, a centrist neoliberal figure in many ways, who's, it doesn't get to the ankles of what Christina Kirchner was, but who still was speaking in terms of the debt that Argentina had in terms of not paying it because it's an unpayable debt. But now you have this total buffoon who's not okay in the head, doesn't have all the screws tightened up, someone who gets some of his politics from his dead dog and who has like cloned like 5 versions of his dead dog, and someone who's not okay. So
it's basically like Prax Ben from TikTok is the Argentinian president now. The libertarian guy who's like messaged my mom on Facebook because he's obsessed with me and doesn't like me and emails my job once a week trying to get me fired. That guy's the president of Argentina now. First libertarian elected, so that's
But it does tell us something about like the flair that he brings into politics. Trump had something similar. He did not feel like a regular politician at the level of aesthetics, at the level of substance. At the level of substance, these people look radical, not because they're breaking from the dominant stage of capitalism, but because they're intensifying it at rates that they weren't being intensified before. All that right now Milei would do was a process of neoliberalization that has been ongoing for a very long time, that's taken a more gradual approach to it. All he would do is radicalize that same process. So you have to ask yourself, well, is it actually radical? When something's radical, that means that it's getting at the root and changing something from the very foundation of what it is. And all Milei is doing is just increasing the speed at which the system is going, so that more is privatized, more is deregulated, more is financialized, more parts of the Argentinian economy are subservient as a neo-colonial state to Wall Street and to U.S. imperialism. So it's the opposite of radical. He's like a very efficient fertilizer that is helping the plant that has caused the cancer for the Argentinian people, the plant of capitalism in this current stage. It's helping it grow at a speed faster than ever before. So there's nothing radical about that. Radical is going to the roots and taking it off and saying, we're not going to do this. We're going to do something completely different. We're going to prioritize the Argentinian people and not, these multinational corporations or Wall Street. So he's not radical. It's just the appearance, the aesthetic of radicalism. And people are so desiring of a radical change that they can be fooled by these demagogues like Milei, like Trump, or like Bolsonaro and others that present themselves. The appearance is radical, but it's devoid of any actual radical substance, of any actual policies that go against the deep state or the global elite, whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. It's a false paradigm. I've heard you need to edit the clips. Definitely could use that. I need to check back with the Discord. I know that you said you're down Battle Cossack, but yeah, that's what we spend a lot of our time doing. And I know that you guys like the clips. I know people in the chat are constantly saying clip that. So yeah, if someone could help us do that, it'd be amazing, because it takes a lot of time and energy. And there's only limited time and energy that we have on this earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot of our live streams are long as hell. Most of our live streams lately have been anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. So we can take easily, 5 to 7, 8 highlights from that. And, for people who are just interested in seeing, like, I don't know, the analysis I gave of fascism in the last stream, like, it becomes easier to do that if we have like the highlight there than if they have to watch the whole 3 hour and 30 some minutes stream. So yeah, we're currently still looking for someone who can help to do some of those highlighting through Twitch, the thumbnail, and then upload it sort of thing. So thank you, Aaron Young, for the $10 super chat. Thank you so much. Dongmu is comrade in Korean. Thank you so much. I hope it's not like a dirty term, because that's
thank you, Dongmu.
That's a good strategy. You always call him back whenever they say comrade is or something, because man, I grew up with my dad telling me all these stories of his workplace where in South Florida not a lot of people spoke English, and whenever there were people who only spoke English that were recently hired to his place of employment, they would mess around with them and tell them like dirty things to say in Spanish as a replacement of like good morning or how are you doing. So I'm always skeptical of like the here's how you say this in this language sort of thing. But thank you so much, Aaron, for the $10 super chat. It's a People's Funded Institute, so these are tremendously appreciated. But I wanted to bring up a story. I wonder if you've heard of this, Eddie. It's pretty bonkers. But Berlin is currently having people who want to become new citizens swear loyalty to Israel. So I don't know if you guys heard that. Correct? It's pretty goddamn.
That's
insane.
real.
And yeah, it's an extremely unpopular government. Between the two ruling parties, you combine their popularity, and it's 25%, as Galloway's going to speak about. And of course, remember that Germany is being led by a party and a leader in Olaf Scholz, who literally was just, look, zip it. Didn't say anything after the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which was literally the energy source for a lot of the industrial projects that Germany was carrying out as the sort of productive base, the productive ground for both the European economy and the euro. Germany has been since in a spiral of deindustrialization, simply because that fixed capital, those materials in the form of natural resources that they were getting from Russia at a low price that they were using to then develop their productive plans, they don't have that anymore. Now they're buying oil and liquefied natural gas either from the U.S. or from Russia through the middleman of India at price hikes that are unlike the price that they were getting it before. So they're spiraling into deindustrialization, and they didn't do anything to condemn the people that put them into this position by illegally blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline and creating the largest environmental terrorist disaster in the history of humanity. So it's no surprise that these people who are not loyal to their nation, who are not loyal to their people, who are deeply embedded in committing high treason in order to support U.S. imperialism, it's no wonder that they end up taking policies like this. But let's give this clip a watch, and let me know whenever you want me to stop it, Eddie.
I told you I was walking in the streets of Berlin, past the town hall in the capital of Germany. Look at what I found.
This is the Red House. This is the town hall in Berlin, the capital of Germany. Germany has gone quite mad. Behind me, you will see a European Union flag, one German flag, one Berlin flag, one Israeli flag. That's the country currently massacring 6,000 children as we speak. And not less than 1, 2, 3, 4 Ukrainian flags. 4 Ukrainian flags equals one German flag on the city hall of Berlin, capital of Germany. They are debating in the Bundestag this day a proposal that any new German citizen must swear allegiance to the Reich. Not the German Reich, the Israeli Reich. You have to swear that you support the state of Israel to become a citizen of Germany. As far as I know, this is entirely unprecedented. I had to, when swearing in as a member of parliament, swear allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen and all of her heirs and successors. If I didn't do so, I wouldn't have been allowed to sit down and I wouldn't have got any wages. So I did swear, but I didn't mean it. And why the German government imagines that a new German citizen from, say, Palestine may want to swear allegiance to the state of Israel is completely beyond me. It's performative identity politics madness. But then Germany has gone quite mad. It's got a prime minister standing at 12% in the opinion polls, allied to bonkers Baerbock and the gruesome Green Party in Germany on 13%. That means between the two of them, two parties, has the support of 25% of the people of Germany. They're not much longer for power in this land, so there's no guarantee that what comes next will be any better.
There you go. That's bourgeois democracy.
No kidding. No kidding. Agree that diving deep into Gabriel Rockhill with some fruit juice or something is a great idea, Palestine. But I mean, unbelievable. There's two. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say there's only two fascist states in the world. You could probably describe other states as that, like Kosovo, which is basically just NATO occupied, carved out of Serbia. But either way, like, two of the most explicitly fascistic states in the world are the flags that are waving outside of the city hall in Berlin. And, you know, this isn't democracy. The people didn't vote for this. The people didn't vote for those to go up. This is ideology being enforced from the top down, saying you have to support these governments. You know, we, the ruling class, decided that you, the people, support these governments. These are the governments we're getting behind. And it's disgusting, but yeah, it's shows how much of a facade our democracy really is, or democracy in Europe really is. I mean, the fact that we still even allow these countries to call themselves the liberal democracies is laughable.
No, absolutely, man. And yeah, it's I think it's a good case study in the fact that it's not just American so-called liberal democracy that works like this. It's bourgeois democracy, which I went on a rant yesterday about. You know, I know this is a technical term in our Leninist tradition, but even giving them the credit of qualifying democracy in any way is absurd. Democracy just means rule of the people. And what all of these bourgeois states have is literally the opposite of that. It's technically an oligarchy. That's all it is. It's a small group of people who control everything, and political will is really just the will of their class. It's very, very rare, unless there's tremendous public pressure and the people are organized and fight for something, that the will that expresses itself in governance is not the will of the elite. And when that does happen, it's really in the form of concessions that they take in order to prevent a much more radical break from taking place in the people. So um, these are not democracies. These couldn't be any farther from democracies. Um, but yeah, I think that the case of Germany is very telling. Like, you want to talk about a treasonous state? Scott Ritter says you can't even charge Olaf Scholz with treason. The only thing you could charge him with is high treason. High treason. None of these people care about their people. None of these leaders care about their people. They only care about the capitalist class, internationally, globally organized, that funds them and supports them and whom they represent. That's the only thing, the only interest that concerns them when they're crafting out policy.
It reminds me of the American official who wore the IDF uniform to Congress. It was like an American congressman or something. It's like, why don't you just scream from the rooftops, hey, I don't actually serve the people. I serve the Israeli lobby. I serve lobbyists who are the political arms of corporations. I don't listen to people at all. My constituency is my corporate donors, my corporate lobbyists, of which AIPAC and the Israeli lobby is one of the largest and most powerful in the country.
Late stage bourgeois financialized monopoly capitalism. I'd add neo imperialism in there, also known as a complete shithole of a society. Absolutely. It's shit for literally everyone and heaven for a small group of people. Thank you so much, Comrade Estarback, for another €5 super chat. Azerbaijan, essentially a colony of British petroleum, is the alternative to Russia/Nord Stream 2, hence their ongoing aggression against Armenians. Very interesting. Eddie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's I know it's being portrayed as Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict, very similar to how Israel-Palestine is portrayed as a conflict, even though it's not really a conflict. It's one power perpetrating basically, an attempted genocide against another. But it's not something I've studied deeply, even though at one point I was asked on TikTok what's going on between Azerbaijan and Armenia is after a bunch of shelling happened. And the Western news media will tell you that both sides are shelling each other back and forth, but it's mostly Azerbaijan, which with Western funding, shelling and killing Armenians. Again, very similar to Israel, who's having money and arms dumped into them by the United States to massacre Palestinians, and then the media says, oh, it's a conflict, and they portray it like it's a conflict between two countries, or it's a conflict between two equal powers, when of course it's not. One is being armed to the teeth by the most powerful militaries on the planet, and the other is not. But it's something that I should learn about more soon, because it's going to have serious geopolitical implications, I guess Starbuck is saying here. Talking about Azerbaijan in relation to the Nord Stream pipeline.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah, you want to get into the Andrew Tate interview? I have a couple clips from that. I'm not sure if there's like parts that are overlapping in those clips. Actually, let me see. There might be. Yeah, but let's watch that. So Andrew Tate recently did an interview with Piers Morgan. It's the second one that he's done with Piers Morgan, and the part that we're going to be reacting to is where they speak about the Israel genocide of the Palestinian people, where Andrew Tate speaks basically in favor of Palestine and calls what Israel is doing to Gaza and the West Bank a genocide. So I know this is a figure that is extremely controversial, who also said other things in this interview that Eddie and I and the Institute would vehemently disagree with, but he is one of the most famous people on the planet. one of the most followed and revered people on the planet. So when someone with that scope of influence speaks out against the genocide of the Palestinian people and aligns himself, at least on this issue, on the side of the progressive pro-humanity forces, I think that's generally a very positive thing and a very positive phenomenon, and something that can only have positive effects for the Palestinian cause. But let's give some of his statements a watch.
Between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. What is your view of this war?
I think when you call it a war, you're doing a disservice to the people who are having their limbs blown off by some of the most advanced technical weaponry on the planet. It is a genocide, and it is disgusting. And it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you fall on. When you observe a genocide in front of your very eyes, you should be disgusted.
Which side is waging genocide?
The Israelis are genociding the Palestinians, and you know it as well as everybody else does. That. Well, then it seems like your bosses are not allowing you to know it.
What do you think between?
Suck it, dude. That is awesome.
That was on the money.
Yes, on the money. Telling him and exactly what everybody knows. You know what's going on. You know the Palestinians aren't doing a genocide. The Palestinians are fighting with jerry-rigged fireworks, right? One side's getting $4 billion a year in arms from the United States, and the other side's not, right? One side is racking up death counts that are almost unbelievable, 6,000 children and 12,000 people. The other side is not. One side has mountains of evidence of babies having their limbs blown off and their heads blown off and being carried away by their parents in plastic bags. The other side has to make up stories like that because there's no evidence. Where are the 40 beheaded babies? Where are the babies in the ovens or whatever these atrocity propaganda stories from Israel are? They haven't been able to produce evidence because there is none. So everybody with a brain in their head knows who's committing the genocide here, right? If Piers was being honest with himself, he knows who's committing the genocide here. But as Andrew says, his bosses won't let him say that. He's got to toe the ideological line. Otherwise, there's no Piers Morgan Uncensored, which is hilarious because he blocks people all the time who call him out on his bullshit. So uncensored my ass. He's censoring himself right here.
Absolutely. And in this interview, or this part 2 of the interview, he says October 7th, like 20 times. 20 times. Which is insane, as if this all started, as is this whole conflict all started on October 7th. There's a good question here from Sean Moon, and it's a sentiment that some other people in the chat share, which is, it is perfectly obvious that he is being platformed by the mainstream media to deliberately harm the Palestinian cause. I don't know. I respect that opinion, but I have a different view of it. I think that someone with that level of reach and influence over tens of millions, perhaps even hundreds of millions of people, standing on the side of Palestine and calling it how it is a positive. Regardless of what other views they might have on say women, which are definitely outdated views that even the vast majority of regular American conservatives probably won't agree with. So someone with that level of influence getting his people on board with the Palestinian cause, at least with this first race, the sprint for a ceasefire, I think is only positive. And when we have these political goals ahead of us, like stopping a genocide, we're going to have to work with people whom we don't fully agree with, and some people whom we might even conceive of some of their other ideological positions, as reprehensible. But we are going to have really broad alliances and literally just have the only precondition to get involved in this movement against genocide be that you're against genocide. Do you really think that, like, the Palestinian people, the few that are able to see Andrew Tate comment on the reality of what's happening to them, are going to be like, he has said some mean things about women. I don't want him to be the face of Palestinian resistance, which he's never going to be the face of that. But how do you think regular Palestinian people on their phone seeing Andrew Tate do this interview, calling out the genocide that they're living under for what it is, don't you think that's going to be like making them happy? Are they really going to condemn him? No, so it's a game of numbers right now. We need the vast majority of people to be on the pro-humanity side and to fight against genocide. If he can help get millions of people on it, that's a
I
positive.
mean, just look at Jake Shields, who's one of the most popular pro-Palestine voices on Twitter right now. One of the most popular, and he's an MMA fighter who I've followed forever, right? And I've been loving his pro-Palestine posts, helping to promote them on TikTok, retweeting them, and there are all these people who are like, yeah, but Jake Shields he's been wrong about this, that, and the other in the past. I'm like, okay. I don't follow him for his political opinions. Usually I follow him because he's an MMA fighter. But to have someone who so many people follow because he's an MMA fighter or whatever, then speak out about Palestine, that's objectively a good thing. That's going to convince people to be pro-Palestine. And also, Jake Shields has always been involved in politics, and a lot of leftists have canceled him and written him off and called him a piece of shit who's not worthwhile. But me and a handful of other people from our community and other communities have continued reaching out to him, have continued trying to convince him to side with communism, basically, try to convince him or try to educate him about imperialism and how the media lies to us about imperialism. And that has helped him get to this position now where he's pro-Palestine. So I think just writing these people off, seeing certain figures in the media as untouchables. I mean, maybe like a Kanye West, but it's for the most part it's silly. When these people have massive influence and they take our side on something, I think that's a good thing for the most part.
Easy, just jump over, jump man. Sean Moon says an entire gender will hear this asshole and take the opposite side of everything he said. I don't think so, primarily because one of the centerpieces of the liberal wing of Israeli Zionist Nazi propaganda has been wokeism. Their whole thing has been, look at how the Palestinians treat women because they're Muslims. Look at us. Look how enlightened we are. Look at how enlightened we are. That was one of Sacha Baron
Cohen's propaganda points. Sorry, he wanted to show a Hezbollah member some like gay scene, and that was a big controversy. Exactly. Perfect example.
Right. So it's this angle has already been there forever, and if people are who do support these the rights of women and LGBTQ people, if they support Palestine now, what do you think that Tate coming out in favor of Palestine is going to do to that? If the Israeli propaganda hasn't convinced them, Tate's other positions are not going to convince them against being pro-Palestine. And what type of human being would stop supporting the struggle against the genocide simply because someone who has opinions about things they disagree with supports that cause? What sort of moral bankruptcy do you have to have? I'm sure there were assholes that were against Hitler, but just because a dickhead was against Hitler doesn't mean that you stop being against Hitler because you happen to find yourself in that circumstance on the same historical side as someone who might be morally reprehensible in a whole host of other areas. So again, when we're not asking Tate to join the party, we're just saying that I think we think it's positive that he's reaching millions of people with the truth about this issue. It might not be as neatly presented as Norman Finkelstein is capable of doing so, or someone like Richard Medhurst, or the people from the Institute, or the people from Electronic Intifada, but it's still the truth. There's a genocide happening, and it's evident. And it's also evident that the mainstream media, is censoring it and trying to present itself in this very bogus attempt at objectivity when there's nothing objective about what they're doing. And if Tate is exposing that, I think that's a positive.
For sure. I mean, you see people in the comments already. I just see insanely rare Tate L and someone then saying rare Tate W. Like, people are forming their opinions on this regardless of their thoughts on Tate. But also, I'm sure it'll work the opposite. Like a lot of Tate's fanboys will form their opinion about this issue just based on what he said. I think that's more likely to happen, right? Young kids who follow Andrew Tate are more likely to say, okay, he's pro-Palestine, I'm pro-Palestine, versus people who are already pro-Palestine probably aren't going to change their position just based on what Andrew Tate said. They're not going to be like, I supported Palestine and was against genocide yesterday, but now that Andrew Tate has the same opinion as me, I changed. I don't feel like there are that many people out like that out there, because to be pro-Palestine, you kind of already have to be educated on the issue, right? So if you're already pro-Palestine, then what Andrew Tate has to say about it shouldn't really matter to you. But I see what people are saying, but yeah, I agree with Carlos.
I honestly, I don't think it even matters whether he agrees with it or not.
Right.
It's the fact that the people that listen to him and the people that he has an influence over will likely come to agree with it because of him. And that might lead them to seeing other content that has a similar perspective, and it might even, help them, move them. If you disagree with what Tate's saying, it might help them move them away from Tate. So but yeah, there's also another video where he's talking about hummus, and Piers asks him whether he condemns hummus. Let me see if I can pull that up. It's actually the second video. Let me pull that up.
In terms of what Hamas did on October the 7th, do you accept that was an act of terrorism?
It's an interesting question because
It's not really.
It is. No,
It's a very
it truly is.
straightforward
Because
question.
you're the person who would have called Nelson Mandela a terrorist while he was still in jail, and one person's terrorist and another person's freedom fighter.
I wouldn't
For
have
me to
called him
answer the question, I have to be very professional, Piers. For me to sit on the outside in Romania with no personal involvement in Israel-Palestine, it's easy for me to say yes, there's an terrorist. However, if I was in Gaza, if I was in an open air prison, if my family had been annihilated by bombs from the sky, if everybody I knew had suffered the loss of a loved one, if I had no chance of any kind of freedom or democracy or standard of life, would I believe it was an act of terror, or would I believe it's an act of resistance against oppression? I understand what happens when you take people and put them in such an inhumane condition. So anybody to sit and say that you're going to take people and put them in absolutely inhumane conditions and give them no standard of life, and they're not allowed to ever fight back, or they're
But I can agree with you.
anyone who
Well,
does
wait a
that is an
Shut
amateur.
up, Piers.
The plight of the Palestinians for many decades has been absolutely shameful.
So what did we think was going to happen,
Wait a
Piers?
minute. No, nothing justifies what happened on October 7th.
So what are they
Nothing.
supposed to do?
Wow. And it's the exact same thing I told Destiny. Right after I smoked him for an hour in a debate, all he could fall back on was, what about October 7th? What about October 7th? Do you justify that? Well, I'm an American, right? So all I'm advocating for right now is a ceasefire, and for America to stop funding Israel, for America to stop giving Israel $4 billion in weapons a year. But if I was in Palestine and the Israelis killed my brother and the Israelis killed my sister with U.S. funded airplanes and U.S. funded bombs, you bet your ass I would be taking up arms and fighting back. You bet your ass I would. And the fact that you wouldn't, Destiny, shows how much of a coward and how not a man you are, as Noah would say. But absolutely, I mean, try and put the shoe on the other foot. Like, imagine if Israel had conquered every section of America except Oregon, and we'd all been pushed off of our land into Oregon. You don't think there would be Christian nationalist militias rising up? You don't think there would be people rising up to fight back to try and gain their land back? Of course there would be, right? But Americans can't put the shoe on the other foot. They can't, or propagandists like this, like Piers, are paid to not put the shoe on the other foot, to not know the historical context of the situation, and just to call them a bunch of terrorists who attacked Israel in a vacuum.
Exactly. And so when we're in the context of the progressive response being, yes, I support Palestine, but I condemn Hamas, for Tate to situate the attacks by the Palestinian resistance forces on October 7th in the history of occupation is pretty neat. And it's true. Like, how would you condemn Nelson Mandela? Would you condemn Nat Turner and John Brown? Like a lot
They
of these
would
people,
have at the time.
they would have at the time. It's another form of the hindsight anti-imperialism. It's a form of hindsight support of anti-imperialist or anti-oppression resistance. They can only support it years down the line when they can treat it objectively and not have to pass these difficult moral judgments. But it's been very sad to see the vast majority of people consider these liberation forces democratically elected by the Palestinian people, because they think Hamas is just like this ISIS organization funded by the U.S. Well, they don't think it's funded by the U.S., which it is, but they think it's just a terrorist group controlling Palestine. It's a democratically elected organization in Gaza. It's a liberation force that it's supported by the people because it's seen as the only way to fight for freedom that has been left to them by the occupational Israeli Zionist force. So, to be a leftist or whatever, someone who sides with Palestine and to condemn Hamas is so weird. And when you see someone like Tate not do that, it shows how low the barrier is. Like, it's pretty darn low. Like, if you're a Marxist, if you're a socialist of any kind, and you're out here condemning Hamas, but saying you side with the Palestinians and condemn genocide, but then someone like Tate is doing this, it's like, come on, if Tate can do it, you should be able to. You should be able to draw the connection to Mandela, who said in a speech in Palestine that violence is justified when it's the only alternative, as it was in the case of South Africa and as it is in the case of Palestine. So what are we doing here? Where are our principles? We should be ashamed that someone like Tate, who's not a Marxist, who's got this sort of pseudo anti-matrix thing going on, when in substance, a lot of the central areas that he speaks about, he's very pro-matrix, like the ideology of just become rich so you could take care of your family. That's bourgeois ideology, just bourgeois ideology of the last period. Now bourgeois ideology is a little bit more woke, but that's bourgeois ideology of the last period. It doesn't escape the matrix. It tries to go back on an old file that the matrix had and overcame and tries to bring it back in some ways. But if he can fucking do it and be right and stand with the Palestinian resistance, how are people who consider themselves Marxists and socialists not going to do it? It's absurd. And I have in mind here specifically Cornel West, who came out with an article about nuance. Nuance. We need nuance here. We need to condemn Hamas, but we need to support the Palestinian struggle. You can't support the Palestinian struggle, the long-term struggle for the right of return, for a secular state where Palestinian Muslims and Christians and Jews can live together in peace as they were before 1947. You can't support that Palestinian freedom struggle and condemn the people that the Palestinians chose to fight for them for freedom. It's absurd. It's like supporting the struggle of black people in South Africa against the Afrikaners, the white Afrikaners, and condemn Nelson Mandela and the Communist Party of South Africa. What? You can't do that.
Of course, and it's the exact same thing that it was in South Africa. It's the native people of that land being ruled by white European settlers or American settlers coming in from another land and ruling over them and creating an ethno-state that only serves the people who are the white people moving in from elsewhere, ruling over the native population. So when the native population fights back against these Europeans who have been moving in and killing them and stealing their land, they're terrorists. Oh, so what is it? Just the brown people are the terrorists then, and the white people are the and white people can never be terrorists. White people can never be the perpetrators. And now all these people like Piers Morgan look back at South Africa. Of course I support Nelson Mandela. Anti-imperialism in hindsight. It shows its face again, right? 20, 40 years after it happens, yeah, you can condemn it. You can condemn apartheid. But when apartheid's going on right in front of your smug, stupid face, Piers Morgan, you cheer it on because that's what your corporate masters want you to do.
And as Maria says, the PFLP are Palestinian Marxists and they're fighting in the trenches alongside Hamas.
Yes.
That is absolutely, there's been a united front. Right.
Yeah.
There's been basically a united front on this issue. I wanted to address this. Based anti-imperialist Andrew Tate, leader of communism. I wouldn't take it anywhere near that far, but what are your thoughts on this, Eddie? Huh?
I mean, we need a strong leader. We need Stalin too. And I think Andrew Tate gives us that.
We have to re-educate Tate in a communist gulag.
Yes.
Make
No
him
more
a
cam
communist.
girls. No
No
more
more cameras.
OnlyFans shit.
None of that. Make him a communist and make him lead the communist movement. By the way, since comedy's dead, these are, we're just joking. When is the one chip challenge going to happen? We hit the 40K mark. Thank you to the 40K subscribers on YouTube. Eddie, when are you doing the one chip challenge?
Maybe I'll pick one up on my way home from Thanksgiving here with my parents and do it as soon as I get home. I'd say this weekend would be a good weekend to do it.
I was talking with my wife, and I don't think it's the best idea for you to do it before at any time that's near to the competitions.
That's true.
Because it has been known to fuck up your stomach.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I've heard you spend about a day out of commission after you eat it. So
right.
Can't wait.
Right. Oh man. But let's get into our next story. It's on Obama's national security advisor, Stuart Seldowitz, being a racist pig on the halal street food that Comrade Sebastian earlier on in the day told us that he's been to. So let's watch this video from Loki, Comrade Loki, who does tremendous work for Mint Press News and other outlets. Let's give this video a watch that contextualizes who Stuart Seldowitz is and shows how he is, in actuality, not just this sort of outlier, but he's a product of the capitalist imperialist system, a system that when it needs certain economic ends achieved, it has to always dehumanize whoever becomes the new enemy in order to achieve those economic ends, whether it's the Palestinian people, whether it's the Russian people, the Chinese people, whoever it is. Racism, xenophobia, the hatred of the other, the otherization of people from abroad, becomes a necessary phenomenon for capitalism. It's not what drives affairs, but it becomes an epiphenomenal, so a necessary component of the drive, the economic drives, because it's what allows people to put their guard down, dehumanize the victims, and consent to the criminal actions that are being carried forth by the imperialists. So here's Loki doing what he does best, speaking truth to power. Let's listen in.
Now, we've all seen this footage of Stuart Seldowitz abusing a street vendor in New York.
If we killed 4,000 Palestinian kids, you know what? It wasn't enough.
But who is Stuart Seldowitz, and what has he been a part of for all of these years? Stuart Seldowitz, the 3-time recipient of the State Department's Superior Honor Award. He served in the State Department in their Office of Israel and Palestine Affairs as Deputy Director during the Bush years. This racist man had a role in managing the lie of the two-state solution. The two-state solution that was the subterfuge through which Palestinians have been continually battered by years of Israeli occupation. The PR drive around the world, the mirage for a future that never existed. Stuart Seldowitz also was a national security advisor to President Obama, the same President Obama who led the NATO intervention of Libya, which saw the country bombed 7,000 times in a 6-month period that led to Libyans trying to escape and drowning in the Mediterranean. His words are not just frivolous sentences coming out of the mouth of a racist. They are actual policy.
Comrades in Egypt will get your parents.
Go.
Does your father like his fingernails? They'll take them out one by one.
When he speaks so easily of fingernails being removed by pro-Israel and pro-US dictators, he is not simply using poetic flair. He means people have their fingernails removed by those who are merely satraps of the US empire. What we heard on the streets of New York was an articulation of what has been effectively US policy towards the region throughout the time that that gentleman has been employed by the US State Department. But beyond the outrage and the immediate association of Stuart Seldowitz,
He was wearing like 2 outfits in the videos. How many times have they caught this guy saying some ridiculous racist pig shit by a fucking halal cart?
Right?
How many times did it have to happen before he went viral? Jesus
Right?
Christ.
It's
Oh.
insane. This guy is a menace to society, but he's the
You can
person
tell he's also
running our
unstable.
society. What?
You can tell he's got some screws loose as well.
Yes.
but-
Yes. He was at
with
what was he under the? Did he serve under Bush or only under Obama?
I think only under Obama.
Okay, interesting.
Not sure.
Because people always portray Bush as the one who was kind of a psycho, had a few screws loose, but Obama
As a national
was,
security advisor, by the way,
Gotcha.
under Obama.
versus Obama was the better maintainer of empire. He put a good smiling face on the empire, but behind the scenes he had pure psychopaths running his policy.
Right.
the US government, Obama and Bush, and bipartisan necropolitics of US empire, let's also look at the place that listed him as an employee at the time of his harassment of this man on the streets of New York. Stuart Seldowitz was listed as an employee of Gotham Government Relations. This is a lobby group for hire that has very close connection to the Israeli government. Shai Franklin, a key figure at Gotham Government Relations, was simultaneously employed by the Israel-Kosovo Chamber of Commerce and has gone to great lengths to state his support for Israel throughout this horrendous war on Gaza.
The comrade here, Daniel, says Stuart Seldowitz worked under 3 U.S. presidents, Clinton, Bush, Obama. There you go. So these are individuals produced by the systems. They're not these like outliers. We have to ask, like, what society produces these racist pigs, and what society allows them to be in these positions of power? And it's a society that needs a systematic otherization of whoever becomes the new target of empire. You know, last year it was Russia. Like, the racism that we've seen against Russian people has just been horrific. You know, constantly it's the DPRK. The stories that are told to dehumanize the Korean people are just horrific. Now it's the Palestinians, and it's always one group, and it just ends up reoccurring. But the dehumanization part of it is essential. There's this great episode from the show Black Mirror, where they had to like inject the officers with something so that when they saw the people that they had to massacre and that they were occupying, what they saw were monsters, like literal monsters instead of people. And for one of these guys, the chip fails and they end up seeing what is real, which is that, oh shit, these are people. And it causes mayhem. And the reality is that without this racist dehumanization, it's very hard for human beings to carry out these sorts of actions or to support the carrying out of these sorts of actions against other human beings. Our sort of instinctual reaction is when we see the dead Palestinian baby, we're like, holy fuck, whatever is causing this, we should fight to stop it. And you have to be very twisted in the mind, confused and working under various forms of false consciousness to be like, okay, this is good. Or to do the sort of videos that we see from Israel of people like with a baby toy making fun, mocking the mothers, the grandmothers, the fathers that have had to held their dead baby, their massacred baby in their hands.
Yeah. I don't even have anything else to add. We can just play the video.
Even helping to organize pro-Israel demonstrations that were attended by Seldowitz himself. In addition to that, you have the case of Gary Ackerman, a US congressman registered as an employee of Gotham Government Relations. Now, when Gary Ackerman was in US Congress, his relationship with AIPAC was so close and so well known that he even intervened and assisted in the release of an Israeli prisoner of war. You also have Gotham Government Relations on record attending a celebration for Israel's 70th anniversary at the United Nations alongside Danny Danon, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. You also have Gotham government relations working for Donald Trump in his first presidential campaign. And during that time, it was alleged that Gotham government relations paid actors $50 each to be part of a cheering crowd for Donald Trump, the president.
So now,
Stuart Seldowitz is not an...
Now we know the kind of people who are showing up to these Israel rallies. It's former U.S. State Department officials and people that they paid to show up. And someone earlier said these people don't just serve one term, they show up for multiple. Yeah, the people behind the scenes are like that, like Elliot Abrams, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo. We thought these people were gone with the Bush administration, but they come back. And a lot of the people who served under Obama are now the people serving under Joe Biden. These absolute ghouls, these managers of empire.
Absolutely.
Collaboration. He is part of a wider push across these last decades that have seen genocidal wars visited upon people of Western Asia, the Middle East, and further afield. It has seen people of Afghanistan eviscerated by NATO's occupation. It's seen people of Iraq bombed with depleted uranium, which would ensure that future generations were likely to be born in horrific circumstances, and an increase of cancer, which was even larger than that left in Hiroshima. The wars that Stuart Seldowitz and his government exacted upon the rest of the world caused unspeakable human suffering. And so the ideas that we hear and revile at when he spoke them to a street vendor in New York were not merely poetic flair, they were actual policy.
Great point.
I know there's people saying that he's not, that he's in his right mind, but if you're not from the hood and you're wearing a hat like that, there's no way you're doing okay in the dome. There's just no way.
He's a whack job. He's a whack job who happens to be in a position of power, who happened to be born into a powerful family and worked his way up, or maybe has some skills that aid the State Department, but you can tell that guy is not all right in the head.
And that's who the system rewards.
Yep.
These maniac vampire opportunists that for the slightest bit of personal benefit are willing to let whole populations, whole people die. So here's Max Blumenthal. He says that Stuart, he's not only anti-Arab, but he's been seen harassing Russian diplomats in New York City, asking, how does it feel to be a criminal? So let's give this a 6-second video. Watch.
How does it feel to be a criminal? You're not answering my question.
This fucking guy. There is a slight bit of justice in the world because he was fired from his job. Former Obama administration advisor Stuart Seldowitz has been taken into police custody following hate assaults against a halal cart in Manhattan that were caught on camera and caused outrage. The question is, had this not gone viral and shown the sort of people that are allowed to work for the empire for 20 years plus, would this sort of justice had occurred? By the way, this guy's arrested for the racist things he said against a halal cart owner, but not for any of the crimes that he was complicit in that have led to millions of deaths, of displacements.
He got arrested for expressing the views of the U.S. State Department in a one-on-one conversation, right? The sort of xenophobic views that the U.S. Ruling classes use to justify their mass murder and their imperialism and theft of resources and labor abroad. He expressed that xenophobia in a conversation, and that's what got him arrested, right? Not the fact that he's used xenophobia to justify genocide and horrific crimes and the destruction of Libya, which low-key, the presenter here mentioned that a lot of people drowned trying to cross the Mediterranean. There were also concentration camps that were set up with funding from European countries where they were capturing people before they could get to the Mediterranean and putting them in a concentration camp, putting them in a jail because Europe didn't want to deal with all the Libyan refugees who they created. So that's the kind of stuff that this guy has perpetrated his entire career, and he's gotten off scot-free until he felt too confident and started harassing a halal vendor.
Absolutely. I just want to address the comments from Metal Gear, who's saying, criticizing us for supporting Hamas, basically implying that you can support the Palestinians without supporting Hamas. And I think that one of the things that's leading you to that position, my friend, is the fact that you have accepted the narrative of the imperialists surrounding what Hamas is, and the tracing back to October 7th, and all of that has been debunked. 40 beheaded babies. Bullshit. It's been utter bullshit. You know, first they said 2,000 people died at the festival, then they brought it to 1,400, and then they brought it to 1,200. And then they let us know that a big majority of the people that were killed were IDF. The other were IDF reserve or former IDF. And the vast majority of the people that were killed by the fucking IDF, by Israel. A lot of the scorched bodies were scorched by the high technology weapons that Israel has. You can't get those effects that you have in those scorched bodies through the very basic, almost antique weapons that Hamas has. So what they've convinced you to hate doesn't exist. That image of Hamas that you have in your head of, you know, these rapists killing innocent civilians and cutting babies' heads off, that image does not exist. That was created by Israel to get at your emotions, because obviously, if there was a group that was actually doing that, it'd be very hard to say, well, this is an anti-colonial struggle, we're going to support it. Hamas does not do that. They're Muslim. I've known quite a bit of Muslims in my life. I follow some Muslim pages. I have never ever seen any Muslim preach anything close to the things that the Israelis say that the Hamas liberation forces are fighting for. Nothing close. If we accept it, what we're doing is basing our judgment on this issue and on Hamas on the basis of the long history of Islamophobic things that have been said about Muslim people, and that we have been socialized to believe through our system, to the point where they have become unquestioned assumptions that when affairs like this arise, we just end up accepting them because we have these assumptions of these Muslim people being these animals. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stuff that I disagree. I'm not a Muslim, but they're not like this. And it's absurd. And the only evidence we have of Hamas engaging with Israeli civilians is people who were treated in the kindest way possible. It's hard to even describe them as hostages when the literal hostage taker asked them, can I have your banana? And doesn't just fucking take the banana. And when the hostages come out and say we were treated very kindly and it didn't last long. By the way, the old lady whose video went viral after being, kidnapped or held hostage by Hamas, she was killed 2 days after that video came out by Israeli bombs. So the image of Hamas that you're hating, that's forcing you to say, yeah, I support Palestine, but is a fake image. We have to be comprehensive in our critical lens.
And throughout the Muslim world, there are these small pockets of jihadist extremists who will say, throw acid on the faces of literacy workers. But guess what? That was the Mujahideen who did that. That was the U.S.-funded, CIA-funded jihadist extremist groups who the U.S. funded in Afghanistan because they were fighting the Soviet Union, right? There's a tiny, 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 small portion of the Muslim world that meets this description that we get from Western media of Muslims as a bunch of rabid terrorists. And they are the groups who have been kept alive and supported and funded and propped up by the U.S. empire, right? The Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Jaish al-Islam in Syria. These are groups who the U.S. has used and funded and kept alive for regime change purposes. And the vast majority of the Muslim world is not like this, right? So when they try and convince you that Hamas is like ISIS, no, Hamas was created in opposition to Israel, a project of U.S. imperialism. ISIS has been propped up and created by U.S. imperialism and utilized by U.S. imperialism to try and overthrow the governments in Syria and Libya. And also, I don't think Hamas should target civilian areas. There's no evidence that they have been. And, you know, it's still their land. It's still their land that was stolen by Israeli settlers, so they are still justified in going in there and getting that. But do people not realize that it's very symbolic that the Israeli civilians, the Israeli Europeans and Americans who moved into Israel because of their so-called birthright, were having a damn rave? We're taking drugs and drinking and having a great time, while 50 miles away, Palestinian children are in a concentration camp where 97% of the water is fucking undrinkable? Like, does anyone not see that? Oh, yeah, maybe that's why they paraglided over. Maybe they're not a bunch of rabid terrorists. Maybe it's because they don't want to be kept in a concentration camp by people who are having a rave 50 miles away. I mean, it's literally the Hunger Games. It's like the Capitol getting stormed by the poor people who are kept in District 12, right? And you all cheered on the poor people in the Hunger Games, but when it happens in real life, you get manipulated by the media into supporting the Capitol, into supporting the genociders, into the people who are having a damn rave on the land of the folks who they kicked off and shoved into a concentration camp. So sorry if I'm not crying big crocodile tears for these Israeli civilians who stole the Palestinians' land so they could have a damn rave.
And a lot of them are part of the military forces, the armed bodies of men of the Israeli state, because they're all forced to serve a specific amount of time in the Israeli forces. So there's that distinction between civilian and military personnel is a little bit more blurred in Israel, because they literally force civilians to become military personnel at a given age. But I wanted to show this video of a TikTok you did earlier today, because various American politicians and spokespeople of empire have condemned any assertion that what Israel's doing in Gaza is a genocide, when it becomes very clear that all the factors are present. And there's been people who work for the United Nations human rights committees and who've been genocide specialists who have came out and said this is textbook genocide. That's a hard phrase to come by. Textbook genocide has been one of the phrases that has came out of people who work for the UN and who are specialized in these areas. There's literally everything, including statements of genocidal ethnic cleansing intent by leadership within Israel. So let's give this a watch, where Eddie breaks down how an Israeli official publishes an op-ed literally defending genocide, not even trying to whitewash it, literally defending genocide.
Israeli national security leader Giora Eiland just published an article in favor of genocide, arguing that Palestinian healthcare administrators, doctors, and other civilians should be considered valid military targets because they support Hamas. So Israel's not even trying to deny that they're bombing ambulances and hospitals anymore. They're just trying to justify it. Eiland even said that if there was a severe health epidemic in Gaza, he would cheer it on. That would be a good thing, because it would wipe out some of the Palestinian civilians who he sees as deserving of death, even though about 50% of them are kids. The article was published in Hebrew, and it was titled, "Let's Not Be Intimidated by the World," arguing that Israel should ignore the people who are disgusted by the fact that they've killed over 4,000 children and 11,000 people in the last 5 weeks, and that they've been indiscriminately targeting civilian areas, refugee camps, hospitals, and other healthcare facilities. He's arguing that Israel shouldn't be intimidated into stopping their genocide. And this is a real Israeli government official, by the way, and he's pretty high up. These are the kind of people running the Israeli government, the kind of people who cheer on healthcare epidemics and explicitly argue in favor of genocide. If you have an Israeli flag in your bio, this is what you're cheering on.
It was literally a former Israeli official, high-end official, who said that the conditions of the people in Gaza are reminiscent to those of a concentration camp. Like, a lot of the narrative that we use to describe these affairs is not even our narrative. It's been like the admissions of either international organizations like the UN or Israeli high-ranking officials. Open-air prison, concentration camp, genocide, Holocaust, all of those have been, things that have been claimed by forces that are not like, militantly pro-Palestinian freedom, by international organizations and by Israeli officials themselves. Eddie, what are your comments before we turn to this UN expert who says that Gaza is complete and utter carnage, unlike anything he's ever seen before.
Yeah, it was a current Israeli official who was making that argument in favor of genocide, and it's because there's a lot of, and I talked about this in the debate with Destiny too. There's a lot of more centrist Israelis or people who say, yeah, Israel should exist, but we need to stop carpet bombing the Palestinians. We need to stop. And there's a lot of people who hate it or who disagree with the carpet bombing of Palestine on practical grounds. Like, we're not going to get anyone to support a state of Israel if we're committing a genocide and bombing children. So we need to stop. And that Israeli official is saying, no, what are you talking about? Let's keep bombing children. Let's keep bombing hospitals. Doctors are military targets. Ambulances are military targets. So he is arguing from an extremely far-right Zionist perspective, which is the Zionists who are in charge of the Israeli government at this point. It's the extreme right that's been taking place over the past few years. They've been gaining power within Israel. That's him arguing to the other Zionists that we need to be more extreme, that we need to be more genocidal. And these are the people running Israel's government. It's a coalition of far-right extremists because Netanyahu has corruption charges against him, and most of Israeli society doesn't really like him. So he formed a coalition with the extreme far-right. So now you have these absolute psychopaths in the Israeli government making statements and publishing op-eds like that, where they're like, screw all you centrist Zionists who, want to have a state of Israel, but, not commit a genocide. We need to actively commit a genocide and actively expand. And those are the people driving Israeli policy. Guys like that, not the centrists.
Absolutely. That's why the defense has to be put on the table, because there's the more so-called centrist apartheid supporters. There's been questions as to what about the argument that Hamas was funded first by Israel and the U.S. to destabilize the PLO. Objectively, if you're the U.S. empire and its neocolonial outpost in the Middle East, Israel, who do you prefer to fight? Do you prefer to fight like a socialist PLO, or do you prefer to fight a Muslim Hamas? So it becomes clear, like if you have any influence in choosing your enemy, they would obviously choose Hamas over like a PLO or a PFLP and other like socialist or more socialistic ideological organizations within Palestine. That makes no difference in our ability to support or condemn them. If that was the case, then we would have to condemn the vast majority of these coups in the Sahel region in Africa, because a lot of these people were trained by the U.S., but we're not condemning them.
Right. I read a lot about this very debate about 2 years ago because Mehdi Hassan published that article basically saying Israel created Hamas in order to counteract the PLO. And then there were a bunch of counter articles. And of course, we know we can't trust Mehdi Hassan. He works for MSNBC. Right. So, and then there were a bunch of counter articles saying, no, that's not really accurate. It's not like Israel just pumped money into Hamas. They destroyed the PLO, dismantled the PLO, forced them out to Tunisia, and then carpet bombed their headquarters in Tunisia, assassinated all their leaders and all their intellectual leaders, which then Hamas was just basically the next group up. So it's complicated. It's been like 2 years since I read a bunch of academic articles and studies about it, but basically Israel did everything they could to destroy the PLO, and then a new group comes about and they're like, they're terrorists too. But like all the same things they said about Hamas, they also said about the PLO. They didn't care what their actual ideology was. They called them a bunch of murdering Muslim terrorists.
Ding, 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 ding. Absolutely, brother. That's on the money. So let's listen to this. UN expert discuss Martin Griffiths. That's a strange name. Griffiths. Discuss how he sees the situation in Gaza.
You have been, on the front line of this since the beginning, but you've also been, UN special envoy and advisor to many, many, many issues. Yemen, Syria, you've been in UNICEF, you've been doing this for a long time, head of relief operations, NGOs, the whole lot. Have you ever seen anything like this? Well, how do you assess what's happening right now in terms of humanitarian needs in Gaza?
The worst ever, Christiane, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, I started off in my 20s dealing with the Khmer Rouge, and you remember how bad that was, the killing fields and so forth. But 68% of the people killed in Gaza are women and children. They stopped counting the numbers of children killed after 4,500 had been counted. Nobody goes to school in Gaza. Nobody knows what their future is. Hospitals have become a place of war, not of curing. No, I don't think I've seen anything like this before. It's complete and utter carnage.
And I don't know, it's like I grew up in the wrestling community where there's all this stuff about personal development, you know, and don't worry about your circumstances, just control what you can control. But there are people whose spawn point in life is Gaza. That's where they're born. They're born into a concentration camp. Sorry, I stole that from Hassan Piker, which of course he calls it a spawn point. But
you
like,
got to go with
literally,
Heidegger, the thrownness, the point that they were thrown into the world.
yes, they were thrown into a concentration camp. So it's like these people have no opportunity to improve their lives except through collective struggle, right? There's no route to individual fulfillment or flourishing or growth for them, right? They have to get out of this concentration camp. So it's like, I don't know, I see a lot of people in the wrestling community standing with Israel too. It's like, if you guys believe the stuff that you talked about in personal development and being a good person and controlling what you can control, you would support the resistance fighters in Gaza because they have no other option, right? They're trapped in a concentration camp where 97% of the water is undrinkable, where the conditions are unlivable, as this guy says. The only option is to fight their way out. They're in an open-air prison.
Absolutely, and we have accounts from people in Hamas. There's so many videos going viral of Hamas liberation forces, people saying that, like, I joined Hamas because they killed my whole family, or they killed my cousin or my brother, and it's very clear to me that we're living under an occupation, that the only way that they have left for us to escape is violence or this, arms struggle. I wish it had to be this way. I wish I could just go to the beach peacefully and enjoy time with my family. But in order for us to one day be able to do all of those things that free people can do, and do so freely, not under threat of being bombed, we have to pick up the arms today. And I mean, there was a video of a Hamas fighter crying, describing this, like, I don't want to do this, but I'm fucking pushed to the wall. There's no other way that I can achieve freedom unless through these activities. There was a video that went viral. So it's, any attempt at dehumanizing the liberation forces of an oppressed people should be utterly rejected. But let me pull up our next story of the day. I don't know if you got a chance to see this, Eddie, but pro-Israel activists discuss shooting in 2023. U.S. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American politician in the American Congress, who has been, of course, very outspoken of the Israeli genocide of the Palestinian, who has called for a ceasefire, and who has been censored. And I think I heard Katie Halper say that the last person that was censored was someone who was defending slavery back in the pre-1865, pre-Civil War era. So let's listen into these Zionists discuss the assassination attempt of Rashida Tlaib.
Arizona is one of, I can't remember how many states are there. Yeah, so we were one of the first states, so you do not need any of that. But either way, there's going to be wands, guys. So for anybody out there who's recording, yada, yada, there's wands at every single event.
But
and obviously
she'll have bring a gun to an event like that. That's dangerous and not smart. That's like, I would never do such a thing. And plus, there's security there, and you're not allowed to bring weapons to something like an event like that unless you're like a police officer or security, and you're. I would not travel with a gun from another state.
Stealth, what I'm hearing is that if you want to shoot her at the event, you need to do it from
okay,
home.
so the fuck up and drop his ass.
Yeah. Arizona is one of, I can't remember how many states are there. Yeah.
So they've gotten to the level of suggesting assassinating the one fucking politician that is Palestinian American and that is spearheading, the struggle for a ceasefire. So, Eddie, what are your thoughts?
It's crazy. Like this is what I always say in relation to Rashida Tlaib. She is the only congresswoman, the only person in the American government with Palestinian roots, the only one, and therefore she's the only one even timidly voicing support for Palestine. And this is the response she gets. The Republicans try to throw her out of Congress, try to silence her. These people are talking about shooting her. Right, this is what happens when you get one pro-Palestinian voice in the American government. They silence her and they threaten to kill her.
Absolutely. And Eddie, I know you have to go. I wanted to show you a funny video before you go. I have maybe a couple more stories left to finish off the night, but I wanted to show you this video of the OG tanky and see what your thoughts are. As the kids say, incredibly based.
That's from now on. When people ask me what a tanky is, I'm gonna send them this.
Oh, absolutely! It's a cool toy, man.
It is.
I'd buy it for my kid. You know, his first birthday just passed, but we got Christmas coming up, so if I can get him a nice little tank, that'd be cool.
Reminds me of a dump truck I had as a kid, but that's perfect for your kid. Get him a tank with like big communist flag sticking out the back with the hammer and sickle.
My wife might divorce me if I do that, but I'm gonna try.
She'll get over it. Just spend the stream funds that we made today on it.
Yeah. I gotta see if Aldi's has the Chinese tank for kids. But thank you so much, brother, for staying on. I know you're currently on family time, celebrating Turkey Day as most of us are because we're good settlers. But thank you so much, brother. Anything you'd like to say before you head out? I got maybe a couple stories. So I'd be heading out pretty soon, but anything you'd like to say?
For sure. No, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm in my dad's room right now, so I'm gonna end so he can go to sleep. My parents, they're not running around calling themselves communists and waving the Soviet flag, but they are supporting me and letting me use their room. So, they're communists at heart. Shout out to them. But yeah, I hope you all enjoy the holidays, even though it's basically celebrating the genocide of the Native Americans and stealing their land. It's still a good time to be with family. And, since we're reflecting on the things that we're thankful for, I'm thankful for the Institute, all the fantastic people like Carlos at the Institute, and all the fantastic people in our community, in our chat right now. Appreciate the crap out of all of you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, brother. I hope you have a good night, and thank you for coming on. And of course, like always, we'll be in touch. So
you bet. Finish strong.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for most people, they especially on the ultra left, they don't realize that the only reason why the vast majority of people celebrate Thanksgiving is that, one, it gives them sometimes some days off of work. Two, it gives them an opportunity to share a good meal, to break bread with their family members. And I grew up calling it Turkey Day. I didn't even know the history behind it. And it's a holiday rooted in a very horrendous practice of genocide and primitive accumulation that was necessary in the first few stages of what has become a very decrepit capitalist imperialism. But I think the vast majority of people just appreciate the days off. But there are some big protests going on, not tomorrow, but Friday. We mentioned those earlier, so make sure you get involved if there's any in your area. Andrew Ray, thank you so much, brother, for the $10 super chat. This institute is kept financially afloat by you all, so these are tremendously appreciated. On Hamas, when your only choice is to fight or die, the only ones choosing death are the oppressors choosing are the oppressors choosing for the oppressed. Absolutely, and that's the thing. Like, people only see violence when it's the oppressed picking up arms against the oppressor. There's this old quote from Maximilien Robespierre where he says that the only way that we can equate the violence of the oppressed and the oppressor is if we think extremely abstractly and say that, the sword in the hands of the oppressed and the one in the hands of the oppressor gleams in front of the sun the same type of light, and therefore it's the same type of violence. No, it's bullshit. The violence of the oppressor and the violence of an order that's systematically oppressive, exploitative, alienating, um, is constant. It's all embracing. It's a ever present reality in the quotidian lives of the vast majority of people. Whereas the violence of the oppressed is something that they're forced into because of that constantly violent order. And it's no different with Hamas, with the PLO, with any of with the PFLP, which is fighting alongside of Hamas. These are people that have been pushed against the wall and that are forced to resist. And armed struggle is not the path that they selected amongst a wide variety of possible alternatives. Armed struggle is the only path that imperialism, this form of settler colonialism, that Zionism, that fascism, left them to fight through. So thank you so much for the $10 super chat. I see we have another one down here. Magda Lan, thank you so much for the $5 Canadian super chat. Surgeon who had to amputate the limb of his own child without anesthetic, and then in the end the child died from physiological effects of pain. Yeah, I saw that video. Like so many of the other videos that have came out of Gaza, it's so extremely difficult to watch. And there was a category that doctors had to develop, an acronym that doctors had to develop in Gaza, which is just the most absurd thing in the world. And I think it accurately reflects what the Zionists are doing to the Palestinian people, which is, I don't remember the exact acronym, but it depicts a child whose whole family has been bombed and killed. So it's a phenomenon that is so recurring in Israel's current exterminationist war against the Palestinian people that they literally had to develop an acronym for it. Do we know why people develop acronyms and these sorts of concepts? It's because they represent something that's constantly recurring in the real world for them, and therefore it becomes valuable to have a concept to describe something that continues to happen in front of them, so that when it happens, it can be like, oh, that's and then boom, they insert the acronym. It's so often that kids are left without any family because they were killed by the bombing that they had to develop an acronym for it. It's completely absurd. And yeah, that video of the surgeon having to operate on his kid, losing him because of how painful it was because there was no anesthetic, it's just it's gut wrenching. Someday I will say that Marxists are accused of carpet bombing palace. Yeah. Let me see. I see another. Thank you so much, Lucas, Comrade Lucas, a consistent supporter, financial supporter of the Institute. Thanks for the stream, Eddie. Absolutely. I'm so grateful he was able to hop on. Let's see. Keep going down. Thank you so much, Team Orca, for the $1 super sticker. I very much appreciate it. So we have a couple more stories to share. One of them is quite interesting, somewhat funny, but the fact that people are dying makes it not so funny. But it's almost like out of a movie, like a lot of the stories coming out of Israel have been. But here we have an Israeli officer with a U.S. Southern accent. Which lets you know, if you didn't know already, by the fact that we send $3.4 billion every year to Israel, and that we basically finance and equip them with the things that they need in order to carry forth this genocide of the Palestinian people on the basis of U.S. tax dollars. If you didn't know the U.S.'s role in this conflict already by that factual information, just take a look at the officers leading the Israeli occupational forces.
Told my enemy looking for a fight. So I say, good. In the days that followed, I was told my enemy is more prepared and organized than it's ever been. So I said, good. Now I've been told my enemy is prepared for my invasion. He is ready to fight to the last man. And I say, good. My daddy told me to only fight a fair fight. Only pick a fight worth fighting. I will disappoint my daddy. I do not intend to fight fairly. I will burn their city to the ground. I will find every rat hole that they hide in. And I will drop down enough explosives to scare God Almighty.
Look at how they refer to the places that they have forced the Palestinians to live at. Any rat hole. Doesn't that remind you all of the scene from Quentin Tarantino's movie on Nazi Germany where the SS officer comes in and he starts talking about how the Jews resemble rats? Like, he's literally describing where Palestinian people live, 70% of whom are refugees that were kicked out during the Nakba in 1947. He's describing it as like rat dwellings, rat holes. It's insane. If you're not seeing the homologies, the similarities with the racist discourse of Nazi Germany, with the racist discourse of apartheid South Africa, with the racist discourse of Jim Crow U.S. and of pro-slavery U.S. and the antebellum South. If you're not seeing those homologies, there's something wrong with the way that you're connecting things in your brain. Like, it's there in your face. He's saying that the Palestinians go back to rat holes. By the way, a grown man in this position calling his father daddy is a little weird. I don't know. That's a little strange in my opinion. But what is the one thing that the people cheered at? This is on Instagram, so I can't go back to that part. But the one thing that the people cheered at was when he talked about mowing them down and making them crawl back into their rat holes. That's what the Israeli soldiers cheered at. So it's so incredibly despicable. Thank you so much, Poppers, for gifting 2 Midwestern Marks memberships. Thank you so much, brother. With the Midwestern Marks membership, I think you get access to our Discord, which is something you never lose access to. I believe that that's something you get with the Midwestern Marks membership, along with the Patreon membership, which you can sign up for $1 a month, and you never get kicked out of the Discord. If you get a $10 membership, I believe you also get the ebook of my latest book on the purity fetish and the crisis of Western Marxism. But let's get into our second to last story of the day, which is an Orthodox Jew explaining why the problem that we have in front of us is not at all rooted in religion, as the Zionists would have you believe, who call anyone who criticizes their genocide anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish, but it's rooted in colonialism and in the occupation of the Palestinian people. So let's give it a listen.
7 generations in Palestine. Yes, my mother told me. She remember we used to live with the Palestinian neighbors in such a good relationship. We used to babysit each other, the children. In the Jewish holidays, they bring over the children to the Muslim neighbors. In the Muslim ones, they bring over the children to Jewish neighbors. We have no problem. The problem here is not the religion. The problem is occupation, killing, take away the land from people. This is the problem. The problem completely. The Palestine.
That's how Palestine was before 1947. There was peaceful coexistence between the Palestinian Jews, the Palestinian Muslims, and the Palestinian Christians. That's how they would refer to themselves. There's a reason why when we look back at Jesus, we call him a Palestinian Jew. There was other types of Palestinian people living there from different religious backgrounds. and they lived peacefully. These tensions are created by the force in humanity that has been at the root cause of the splinters that have divided humanity more than ever before in human history. The force that has been the ground, the foundation for racism and hatred and the dehumanization of other people, which is capitalism, and in the form it takes under colonialism. We must always remember that the concept of race itself was created by capitalism. Capitalism needed the concept of race in order to use it to divide the European so-called white indentured servants from the African so-called black slaves of the US. It is on the basis of needing the division of these groups that had begun to coalesce together and come together to fight the property owners that the concept of race is created. The system needs racism. As the British historian Carlos Martinez has said, capitalism needs racism in the same way that socialism cannot exist with racism. Capitalism is a system that needs to divide working people, the people that it is exploiting, the people that produce value for the system that gets accumulated by the capitalist class. Those people need to be divided. Those people need to be confused. Those people need to see the world in a way where their objective interest as a class is blurred, and they're forced to consent to things that are not in their interest, that are in the interest of the people who exploit them and oppress them. And racism has been one of the central forms of false consciousness through which people have been divided. And at its core, what racism is a way of dehumanizing people, of considering that at their very being, at the ontological level, they are lesser than another group of people whom you haven't happened to belong to. And at its core, it's a foundational aspect of capitalist class society. I developed how racism functions as false consciousness, specifically in the context of the U.S. in a recent article I did on W.B. Du Bois that I'll link to the chat in just a second. But let's continue listening to the rabbi.
Palestinians don't hate Jews. They hate occupiers. No difference if it's a Jew, if it's a French, it's English, no difference. The same hate they will have if the Japanese will come into the Holy Land and take it over. And the same thing will happen here in England if somebody comes to take it over. 100%. This haven't got nothing, but the Zionists try to do it. No, this is anti-Semitism. No. This is the old anti-Semitism. This is completely untrue. It's completely untrue, and we have to bring this to the attention to know the problem is not the religion. The problem is the occupation. I told you, I'm 7 generations in Palestine. Yes.
Boom. There you go. We've said it, from the beginning of the intensification of the genocide of the Palestinian people that some of the first people to oppose Zionism were the Orthodox Jews. The people that developed Zionism, a lot of them were atheists. So we only say that not because we're Jewish or whatever, just like when we defend Muslim resistant fighters and explore the contradictions between the values of Muslim people and the things that Israel says about Hamas. It doesn't mean, we're Muslim or whatever. We say this simply to highlight the hypocrisy of the discourse. Like, Israel wants to equate everything Zionist to Jewish people. And that's extremely wrong, because some of the most vehemently anti-Zionist people in the world are Jewish. And anywhere from 30 to 40% of global Jewish people, around the world, are anti-Zionist, against the idea of the state and the existence of the state of Israel. So it's even more anti-Jewish to make that equation than to criticize the state of Israel. So let's go to our last story of the day, which is the recent. Oh no, we have two more. Well, since we've been on this topic of how Jewish people see the Zionist apartheid entity, let's give a watch to this clip from Katie Halper in George Galloway's show, where she describes how, as a Jew, instead of Israel making her safer, what Israel does is make her sick.
I am here because I want to make it clear that NATO, the United States, and Israel do not represent me as an American and as a Jew. Israel likes to claim that it makes Jews safer. And as a Jew, I want to say that Israel does not make me safe. Israel makes me sick, and Israel makes me less safe because they are committing crimes against humanity in the name of Jews. Luckily, they don't actually speak for Jews, but of course they claim to. And Jews who speak out against Israel's crimes are the Jews who make me feel not only in good moral company.
You know how bad it is for the fight against anti-Semitism, which is real. You know, the oppression that the Jewish people have faced it's almost unmatched. The last 2 millenniums of oppression. But you know how bad it is for that struggle against anti-Semitism to have as the symbol of your apartheid, racist, fascistic state that functions as the colonial outpost of U.S. imperialism, most evil force humanity has seen. You know how bad it is for the struggle against anti-Semitism to have as the label of that force the Star of David? It's horrendous. But they don't speak for all the Jews in the world, as Katie Halper is eloquently noting.
Not only in good moral company, but also who make me feel safer. So the horrific images coming out of Gaza have shocked even those of us who follow the occupation and have been following it for years. The wiping out of entire families, the bombings of hospitals, and the clear attempt at ethnic cleansing and current ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. They are carrying out a genocide as we speak right now. And I'm ashamed that my government decided to censure the only Palestinian American member of Congress for daring to say that her people are human beings who don't deserve to be slaughtered. She is in good company, though, because the only other member of Congress ever censured was Joshua Reed Giddings. And he was censured for daring to speak out against slavery.
There you go. Beautifully said by Katie Halper. I think it has to be absolutely clear by now to everyone in the audience that it's absurd to have this equivocation, and it's an equivocation that is anti-Jewish. That the way that Israel acts is in a form that is very much more detrimental to the Jewish people than helpful. The last video I wanted to show is Claire Daly giving a short speech condemning the UN and NATO and the EU, not the UN, the EU, on their approach to the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. So let's give that a watch.
Israel expects us to believe that there's no genocide in Gaza. They're only protecting themselves from terrorists. They're trying to limit casualties, and even that the Palestinians are responsible for killing themselves. When Israel controls every entry and exit point in that tiny occupied territory where half of the population are children. Absolute lies, of course, and not for the first time. Cynical distortion, wild accusations, farcical claims, these are the modus operandi of Israeli propaganda. Before the current military conflict, there were 6 others in Gaza since 2006. And after they're done, the lies are exposed, but there's never any reckoning. There's never any outrage from the media. It's just buried and forgotten until the next time the lies are platformed again. Well, this is unacceptable. The media is failing the citizens of Europe and the people of Gaza, because propaganda in the service of genocide should be treated with the contempt that it deserves. Instead, the media defers to it. Well, we have a message for you. It's not working. Our consent for Israel's atrocities cannot be manufactured. The truth about Israeli lies is emerging. The ugly truth about Zionism has revealed itself for all to see, and a new world order will be built. Israel expects...
Incredible. That's a beautiful speech. Every time her and Mick Wallace speak, it's just tremendous. They're people who have, as we say it in Spanish, at least in Cuban, they have cojones. You know, they have guts. They're the sort of people that speak truth to power, and that every virtue they have is laid on a foundation of the most important virtue that you can have, which is courage. Courage is essential. Without courage, how the hell are you going to actualize the other virtues that you have? Courage is what allows you to side on the side of the oppressed, to be on the right side of history when it counts. When it counts. It's very easy to be on the right side of history 20 years down the line. It's hard to be on the right side of history when the propaganda drums and trumpets are on full swing and everyone is being indoctrinated by lies used to convince you to consent to things that are not in favor of your material interest as a working person. It's very hard to condemn what's going on right when it's happening. It's easier to do it afterwards. And Claire Daly, Mick Wallace, and other politicians have been able to show that they have the courage to stand up to the Zionist lies. So it's beautiful to see. Well, with that, we have been able to cover every single one of the stories for the day. Thank you so much to all of those who joined. Thank you to all of the folks that were capable of sending us some financial support. Sebastian, thank you. Thank you, Magda. Thank you, Starback. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Red Maze. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Battle Kozak. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Alexander. Oh, I don't think we got to this one. Congratulations, DPRK, on the amazing satellite launch despite the imperialist aggression. Yeah, it's very sad, but one of the things that countries outside of the sphere of influence have to develop is their security capacities. They have to be able to defend themselves. One of the forms that takes is developing the sorts of weapons that ideally in a socialist world we wouldn't have. Weapons that can cause great damage to humanity, but they're forced into developing these weapons by the empire. That's the only way that they can get any form of respect on the global scene. Before the DPRK developed its nuclear capacities, it wasn't respected or feared as much as it is now. You still had a lot of the dehumanizing propaganda, but now we understand that it's a state that can, if we continue to fuck with it, potentially cause great damage to the citizens that empire needs to consent to their wars. So they're not going to do that. They've pledged not to strike unless they have been striked. But it's very positive when they develop their capacities. And the four modernizations that come from Zhao and Lai, which have been necessary for socialist states to take up, agriculture, science, technology, and securities. These are absolutely fundamental, along with the development of the productive forces, which is included within those. Thank you, Magda, Andrew, again, Lukacs. Thank you, Lukacs. Thank you, Team Orca, and thank you, Poppers. It's a grassroots funded People's Institute. So all of these donations are tremendously appreciated. Well, with that, we can head out as we came in with the glorious International. Thank you to all of those who watched. If you're going to be celebrating with your family tomorrow, I hope you all have some good quality family time. Convince your family to condemn the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.